Forced to be His Queen, written and narrated by Moonbeam Audiobook. Chapter 1. The projector's hum was a death knell. From her seat at the head of the long mahogany table, Akira Kurosawa watched her legacy bleed out onto a crisp white screen. The numbers, displayed in a soulless Arial font, were irrefutable. Kurosawa Innovations, the company her grandfather had built from the ashes of the war, the company she had modernized, streamlined, and bled for, was insolvent. The man presenting, a vulture in a $3,000 suit from a rival tech firm, droned on. As you can see, Kurosawa Innovations' debt-to-asset ratio is untenable. The leveraged buyout we are proposing is not just generous, it is a mercy. Akira's spine was steel. A mercy, she repeated, her voice a low, cold blade that cut through the sterile air of the boardroom. You mean a hostile takeover, Mr. Tanaka. You've spent the last 6 months systematically poisoning our supply lines and poaching our senior engineers. This isn't a buyout. It's an assassination. Tanaka offered a slick, empty smile. Business is war, Kurosawa-san. You simply failed to fortify your walls. Her team, her former team, she corrected bitterly, avoided her gaze. They were all men who had sworn loyalty, now staring at their new master. The betrayal was a physical ache in her chest, sharp and hot. She was used to being in control. She was the one who set the terms, who anticipated every move, who dominated every negotiation. But this was a rout. An hour later, it was over. The vote was unanimous. Her authority was stripped, her shares rendered worthless. She had been surgically, brilliantly, and ruthlessly excised. She walked out of the boardroom, her heels clicking a furious rhythm on the marble floor, and found her father waiting in the lobby. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him, his shoulders slumped inside his impeccable suit. He was clutching a simple, unadorned wooden box. "Akira!" he began, his voice cracking. "It's done," she said, her tone flat. "They took it. Everything. They didn't just take it, my daughter." He held up the box. They sent this." "Sent what?" she snapped, her patience gone. "Another lawsuit?" A final insult. "A tabiki," he whispered, his face ashen. "A guide, a warning." Akira's blood ran cold. That word didn't belong in their world of IPOS and silicon chips. It was an archaic term, one that smelled of incense, steel, and shadow. "Father," she said slowly, who did you borrow from?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. It was after the 08 crash. The banks, they wouldn't lend. We were over-leveraged. I found a private investor, a holding company. "Which one?" He swallowed, his gaze fixed on the box. "Black Onyx Holdings." Akira's mind raced. Black Onyx, the ghost. The same shell corporation that had financed Tanaka's corporate raid. They hadn't just bought her company, they had owned it all along. They weren't just investors, were they, Father? They were the debt collectors. He finally looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "The debt, Akira, it wasn't just money. I offered my life as collateral, and if I failed..." "If you failed, what?" "Yours." The world tilted. The sharp, clean lines of the lobby blurred. "Mine? My life?" "No," he choked out. "Your hand. In marriage. To their leader, it was an old-world agreement. I never thought. I was supposed to have it paid back in 5 years, but the interest? Akira, they are not businessmen. They are the Yamamoto Gumi. The Yakuza." The word hung in the air between them, a toxic cloud. Her father, the brilliant engineer, had made a deal with the devil to save his company, and he had just damned his daughter. "They want you," he whispered, pushing the wooden box into her hands. He has summoned you. Tonight. The address is inside. Akira's fury was a white-hot, clarifying fire. The humiliation of the boardroom, the betrayal of her team, it was nothing. This was the real war. She wasn't just a failed CEO. She was a sacrifice. Fine, she said, her voice shaking with a rage so pure it was almost calm. He wants a meeting. I'll give him a negotiation he'll never forget. The address wasn't a neon-lit nightclub or a concrete bunker. It was a serene, sprawling estate hidden behind 20-foot stone walls in the quietest, wealthiest part of Tokyo. Pine trees, centuries old, filtered the moonlight. The only sound was the distant thwack of a shishiku dosha, a bamboo water fountain, striking a stone. She was met at the gate by two silent men in dark, perfectly tailored suits. They didn't frisk her, but their eyes were a physical weight, cataloging her, dismissing her. She was escorted, not through the main house, but along a winding stone path to a small, isolated tea house set in the center of a black sand garden. The shoji screen slid open, and she was ushered inside. The room was traditional, all tatami mats and pale wood, lit by a single soft lantern. A man knelt in the center, his back to her. He was dressed in a simple, dark samao, and he was grinding ink on a stone. This was him, the man who had just stolen her life. You are late, he said. His voice was not the gravelly growl of a movie gangster. It was deep, smooth, and laced with an unsettling calm. You've been busy, Akira shot back, remaining standing. She would not kneel. Assassinating my company took precedence. He paused his grinding. It was not an assassination, Kurosawa-san. It was a reclamation. Your father wagered what was not his to lose. He wagered a company. You took it. The debt is paid. The debt is not paid, he said, still not turning. The company was collateral. The debt was the insult. He came to my family begging for help, and then he hid from us. He tried to repay a blood debt with paper money. I have a proposal, Akira said, channeling the boardroom. A 5-year repayment plan, 10% interest above prime. I will liquidate my personal assets. He laughed. It was a soft, dry sound, like dead leaves skittering on pavement. He stood, and in one fluid motion he turned. Akira Kurosawa was not easily impressed, but her breath caught. He wasn't a thug. He was magnificent, tall, lean, and radiating an aura of absolute lethal power. His face was sharp, aristocratic, with high cheekbones and eyes so dark they seemed to drink the light from the room. A single, stylized dragon tattoo peeked from the collar of his samue, its scales disappearing up the strong column of his neck. This was Kaito the dragon Yamamoto, the Oyabun of the Yamamoto Gumi. Your personal assets? He mused, stepping closer. He moved with a predator's grace. She fought the instinct to step back. Your penthouse apartment? Your Italian sports car? Your collection of abstract art? They are trifles. I could buy and sell your entire life before my morning tea. Then what do you want? She spat, her hands clenched at her sides. My father's life. Is that it? You want to drag him out into the street? Your father is a fool, Kaito said, his voice dropping. But he is an old man. His life would bring me no honor. He was close now, so close she could smell the sandalwood and ink on his skin. I watched you, Kurosawa-san, for 6 months. I watched you fight. You watched me? I am Black Onyx Holdings, he confirmed. I was Mr. Tanaka's sole financier. I orchestrated the supply line disruption. I poached your engineers. Why? Why destroy the company you intended to take? His dark eyes glittered with an emotion she couldn't name. to see what you would do, to see if the Kurosawa blade was still sharp. You did not cry. You did not fold. You adapted. You counterattacked. You were brilliant, and you were beautiful in your fury. This was not a negotiation. This was a seduction, or a slaughter. "I am not for sale," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Everything is for sale," he corrected her. "You are a CEO. You understand strategic mergers." He stopped, barely a foot away. The air between them crackled. It wasn't just power. It was chemistry. A raw, dark, undeniable pull that terrified and fascinated her. "Here is my proposal," he said, his voice a velvet purr. "Not your father's? Mine." "I'm not interested." "Your father's debt is forgiven. Your family's honor is restored. Kurosawa Innovations is returned to your control, free and clear. I will personally guarantee its success." Akira stared. "In exchange for—" "What?" "Me," he said. "You? You. For me." He reached out, not to touch her, but to trace the air beside her cheek. She shivered but did not flinch. "Your father promised your hand." "I am here to collect." She recoiled. "You're insane. You can't be serious." "I am always serious. You will marry me." Akira laughed, a sharp, broken sound. "Absolutely not." "It is a contract," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "1 year. You will be my wife. You will live in my home. You will be seen at my side. You will be in all ways the Oyabun's queen." "And if I refuse?" His smile vanished. The warmth in the room evaporated, replaced by an Arctic chill. "If you refuse, I will collect the original debt. Your father's life is forfeit. Your family's name will be erased. And I will take Kurosawa Innovations, dissolve it for parts, and salt the earth where it stood, just to prove a point." The stakes were clear. Her pride or her family's survival. Her freedom or her father's life. "This isn't a marriage," she seethed, her entire body vibrating with restrained violence. "It's an acquisition." "It is a merger, Kurosawa-san," Kaito corrected her, his eyes boring into hers. He saw her mind working, calculating the angles, processing the terms. He saw the brilliant strategist he wanted. "You will be a wife in name only, a placeholder, a shield, but you will be mine." He held out a hand, not in supplication, but in command. "Choose. Your father's ruin, or your new kingdom." Akira looked at the hand of the monster who had stolen her company, who held her father's life in his palm, and who was now offering her the world. He saw her as an equal, a queen. She was a businesswoman. This was the ultimate hostile takeover. Slowly, her mind made the only calculation that mattered. She would survive, she would fight, and she would win, even if it meant becoming a queen in this kingdom of shadows. She met his gaze, her own eyes as cold and hard as the steel of a samurai's blade. 1 year, she said. 1 year, he agreed. Draw up the contract. Kaito's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. It is already drawn. Chapter 2. There was no white veil. There was only a suffocating weight of silk. Akira stood rigid as 2 silent, elderly women, their faces impassive maps of wrinkles, methodically encased her. They had stripped her of her bespoke Armani suit, her Cartier watch, her sharp stilettos, the armor of her world, and were now mummifying her in another. The shiromuku, the traditional white wedding kimono, was a masterpiece of embroidered cranes and cherry blossoms. It was also, Akira thought, the most beautiful shroud she had ever seen. It weighed a literal 30 pounds, a physical manifestation of the burden she had just accepted. The heavy, brocaded silk was stiff, binding her arms, restricting her legs. The elaborate Katsura wig was a skull-crushing weight, and the thick, white Oshiroi makeup felt like a clay mask, a porcelain veneer for the sacrifice. She felt less like a bride and more like an exquisite corpse being prepared for the altar. Her father had been banished from the room. Kaito's orders. This was not a father giving away his daughter. This was a master claiming his property. When they were finished, one of the women nodded. "It is time, Okusan." The title, Mrs. Wife, struck her like a slap. It wasn't a term of respect. It was a brand. She was led, her steps forced into a tiny, mincing shuffle by the restrictive kimono, out of the small preparation room and into the stone-paved courtyard of the Yamamoto estate. The compound was silent. Not the peaceful silence of the tea house from the night before, but a heavy, watchful quiet. The air was cool, smelling of damp moss, pine, and the sharp, clean scent of incense. The wedding was not a public affair. There were no photographers, no society guests, no media. Her world, the world of finance and tech, was not invited. His was. They lined the path to the small, private Shinto shrine at the estate's heart. 24 men, all in identical black kuramotsuki, formal kimonos with family crests, stood with their backs ramrod straight. They were Kaito's inner circle, his lieutenants, his kambun. Their faces were hard, scarred, and unreadable. Their eyes, however, followed her every pained step. She could feel the weight of their suspicion, their disdain. She was an outsider, a gaijin to their world even if she was Japanese by blood. She was a corporate creature, a woman of spreadsheets and hostile takeovers, not this. Her father stood near the entrance of the shrine, looking utterly broken. He too was in a formal kimono, one that looked foreign on his slumped academic shoulders. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He had done this. His shame was a palpable thing, a bitter taste in the back of Akira's throat. And then, she saw him. Kaito emerged from the shrine's shadow. If she was a corpse bride, he was a warlord. He was not the modern, ink-grinding recluse from the tea house. He was dressed in a formal Montsuki Haori hakama of the finest black silk, adorned with the 5-leaf kiri crest of the Yamamoto gumi. His hair was slicked back, emphasizing the sharp, aristocratic planes of his face. He radiated an ancient, feudal power that was 1,000 times more intimidating than any boardroom presence. His gaze swept over her, a slow, appraising inventory. He wasn't looking at a woman. He was inspecting an acquisition. His eyes, dark and bottomless, met hers. There was no warmth, no welcome. Only possession. A priest, his white robes stark, began a low, monotonous chant. Akira was guided by the 2 women to stand beside Kaito. He was taller than her, even in the raised geta sandals, and the heat radiating from his body cut through the cool morning air. She could smell the sandalwood on his skin again, but now it was mixed with the sharp scent of starched silk and something else, something uniquely male and dangerous. The ceremony was a blur of ancient, suffocating tradition. The chanting, the bowing, the ritual offerings. Akira moved through it like a puppet, her rage a solid frozen block in her chest. This was a farce, a business transaction dressed up in the robes of sacred ritual. Then came the sansankudo, the 3x3 exchange of sake, the binding. The priestess presented the 3 shallow, lacquered cups. Kaito took the first, the smallest one. He held it, not with his fingertips, but with a masculine grace that was surprisingly elegant. He sipped, his movements economical and precise. Then the cup was offered to her. Akira's hand was shaking so badly she could barely grasp the delicate porcelain. Her rage, so cold a moment before, was now a white-hot tremor. This was it, the final symbolic act of surrender. As she raised the cup, A single drop of sake spilled, a clear crystalline tear, tracing a path down the back of her hand. Before it could fall, his hand covered hers. It wasn't a gentle, reassuring touch. It was a capture. His fingers were long, his grip like a steel manacle. His skin was scorching hot against her cold, clammy flesh. The shock of it, the sheer heat of him, shot up her arm and straight to her core, a jolt of pure, unwelcome electricity. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing into his. He was watching her, his face an impassive mask, but his eyes were alive. They weren't just dark, they were burning. He saw her fury, he saw her terror, he saw her defiance, and he welcomed it. His thumb, rough with a callus, brushed over her pulse point. He held her gaze as he guided her hand, the one he was still gripping, and brought the cup to his own lips. He drank from the exact spot her lips had been, his eyes never leaving hers. It was not a shared drink. It was a claim, an invasion. He was tasting her, marking her, consuming her. Her breath hitched. A slow, hot burn, entirely separate from her anger, uncurled deep in her belly. She hated it. She hated him for making her feel it. The priestess offered the second, medium-sized cup. This time, Akira drank first. Her hand was steady, but she could still feel the phantom heat of his. When he took it from her, his fingers deliberately brushed hers. He was playing with her, taunting her. By the time they shared the third, largest cup, the air between them was so thick with tension it was a living thing. The scent of the sake, the incense, the pine, and the raw, dangerous scent of him, it was overwhelming. This was no wife in name only. This ritual was ancient, pagan, and intensely carnal. The priest made his final declaration. It was done. The Kambun bowed as one, a low, respectful ojigi. One man, older with a scar that split his left eyebrow, stepped forward. He bowed to Kaito, then turned to her. His gaze was not hostile, but it was far from friendly. It was assessing. "Okusan," he said, his voice a gravel pit rumble. "Welcome to the Yamamoto family." It sounded like a death sentence. Kaito gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. The ceremony was over. He turned, not to her, but toward the estate. "Come." It was a command, not a request. Akira's feet felt like lead. The weight of the kimono, the wig, and her new, terrible reality threatened to crush her. She took a step. The wooden geta sandal caught on the uneven stone, and her ankle twisted. She didn't just stumble. She fell. In a move so fast it blurred, Kaito was there. He didn't reach for her. He caught her, his arm a band of forged steel around her waist, yanking her upright and pulling her flush against the solid, unyielding wall of his chest. The impact sent the air from her lungs. She was surrounded by him. The hard, corded muscles of his torso, the immovable strength of his body. Her hands, in their silk-gloved prison, were splayed against his haori. For a stunned second, she was just held, trapped. Then he leaned in. His face was so close his lips brushed the shell of her ear. His hot breath sent a violent, involuntary shiver down her spine. "A queen does not stumble, Akira," he growled, his voice a low, velvet vibration meant only for her. The use of her given name was a violation, an intimacy she hadn't granted. It lit a fuse. "I am not your queen," she hissed, her hands pushing uselessly against the immovable object of his chest. "You are," he murmured, his breath now a warm caress against the sensitive skin of her neck. He didn't move back. If anything, his arm tightened, one hand splayed possessively against the small of her back. "You are my wife, and you will learn to walk as if you own this ground." His thumb brushed the curve of her hip, a slow, deliberate, branding touch that burned through the layers of silk. Because as of this moment, you do. He righted her, but his hand lingered at her waist, a proprietary, inescapable weight. He finally released her, leaving her skin tingling and her nerves screaming. He turned and continued walking, not checking to see if she followed. He knew she would. "It is time for you to see your new home," Kaito Yamamoto said, his back to his bride. Akira stood for a beat, trembling with rage and something else, something hot and dark and terrifyingly alive. She was a prisoner in a silk cage. She was a CEO on enemy territory. She was his. Gritting her teeth, she put one small shackled foot in front of the other. The merger was complete. The war had just begun. Chapter 3. The Yamamoto Gumi main compound was not the ancient, dusty fortress Akira had expected. It was a contradiction, a perfect, terrifying fusion of feudal power and 21st century minimalism. Kaito led her from the shrine, his hand a proprietary weight at the small of her back, guiding her along a covered ingawa, a wooden walkway that surrounded a stunning, massive garden. The garden itself was a masterpiece of raked black sand, ancient, twisted pines, and moss-covered stones. It was serene, beautiful, and utterly devoid of life. No birds, no insects. A sterile, controlled perfection. The main house was a sprawling labyrinth of glass, steel, and pale, 1,000-year-old cypress wood. It was a fortress disguised as an art gallery. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the garden, but Akira noted the glass was thick, impossibly so, bulletproof, bomb-proof. Servants in simple, dark uniforms materialized from unseen hallways, bowing low as Kaito and his bride passed. Their faces were blank, their movements silent. It was the seamless, invisible efficiency of a 5-star hotel or a maximum security prison. Akira, still trapped in the 30-pound shiromuku, her feet aching in the wooden geta, felt like a barbarian in a museum. She was a splash of garish, sacrificial color in his world of cool, lethal shadows. Finally, Kaito stopped. They were in a wing of the house so private even the silent servants seemed to melt away. He stood before a set of massive, unadorned cypress doors. He pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner so seamlessly integrated into the wood, she almost missed it. There was a faint, hydraulic hiss. The doors slid open. "Your domain," he said. It wasn't a bedroom, it was an entire wing. Akira stepped inside, her forced shuffle doing no justice to the sheer scale of the space. It was a penthouse apartment, larger than her own, dropped into the heart of a feudal estate. A vast, open-plan living area was furnished with low, agonizingly chic Italian furniture in shades of gray and black. A state-of-the-art kitchen, all stainless steel and granite, sat untouched, but it was the far wall that stole her breath. It was composed entirely of the same armored glass, offering a god's-eye view of the entire central garden. She could see the tea house where he had signed her life away, the shrine where he had sealed the deal. She was at the center of his web, with a perfect view of her cage. "Where is my luggage?" she asked, her voice raspy. The heavy wig was giving her a blinding headache. "Being delivered." Kaito walked past her, his black silk robes rustling, a whisper of death in the sterile room. He moved to a wall that looked like simple, dark-grained wood. He touched it, and a panel slid open. He turned back to her, and in his hands were two objects. A katana, resting in a simple black shirasaya, resting scabbard, and a laptop. A sleek silver Kurosawa Innovations prototype. Her K-blade, the one that hadn't even hit the market. He said nothing. He simply held them out to her. A choice. Akira stared. The sword was a symbol of his world. The laptop was a symbol of hers. "I am not a fool, Kaito," she seethed, the first words she had spoken to him in an hour. I will not be placated by a new toy. It is not a toy, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He stepped closer. The air between them instantly became thin, electric. It is your weapon, the same one you used to try and fight me. He placed the laptop on a low-slung marble table. It has a dedicated, secure satellite uplink, untraceable, the only machine in the world that can access the Kurosawa Innovations servers, which, as of an hour ago, are back under your control. Akira's blood froze, then thrummed. What? The contract was executed. He was close now. Too close. He was a furnace of heat, and she was so cold. Your father is at this moment signing the transfer documents. The company is yours again. My gift. To my wife. It is not a gift, she spat. It is a leash. You give me back my company, but I am trapped here in your house, playing dress-up. Yes, he agreed, shocking her. You are. Such is our arrangement. He was standing directly in front of her. She had to crane her neck, the Katsura wig threatening to topple her, to meet his gaze. His dark eyes raked over her, stripping away the white makeup, the layers of silk, until she felt naked. I will not be your puppet, she whispered, her hands clenched in the heavy silk sleeves. And I will not be your bed warmer. The contract said a wife in name only. It did, he mused. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, a smile that did not reach his eyes. I find, however, I am dissatisfied with those terms. Her heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm. A deal is a deal, Yamamoto, or does the Oyabun not honor his own contracts? It was a deliberate, calculated insult. She saw his eyes flash, the predator leaping to the surface. His hand shot out, not to strike her, but to cup the back of her head. His fingers tangled in the heavy, false hair of the wig, his grip firm, holding her immobile. I always honor my contracts, Akira, he growled. His other hand went to her throat. She didn't flinch, though her pulse leaped against his palm. His thumb rested in the hollow of her throat, a gesture that was half caress, half threat. He wasn't choking her. He was feeling her life, her fear, her defiance. But you, he murmured, his gaze dropping to her painted, trembling lips, have misunderstood the terms. He leaned in, his own lips brushing the shell of her ear, just as he had at the shrine. His hot breath was a physical thing, sending a jolt of liquid fire straight down her spine. A wife in name only, Kanadake no Tsuma, is still a wife. She bears my name. She shares my home. She is a reflection of my power. His hand at her throat slid sideways, his rough thumb tracing the sharp, defiant line of her jaw. I do not suffer imperfections in my reflections. And this, he tugged slightly on the wig, is an imperfection. With a sudden, sharp yank, he ripped the Katsura from her head. Akira cried out as the crushing weight was removed. The pins tore at her scalp, a sharp, stinging pain. Her own hair, dark and silky, held in a simple bun, was half destroyed, tumbling free to her shoulders in a messy cascade. She stood before him, breathing hard, her scalp tingling, her eyes wide. She was disheveled, exposed, human. Kaito's breath hitched. It was the first and only sign of his composure cracking. He stared at her, not as a symbol, not as a bride, but as a woman. His eyes, burning with a new, dark fire, traced the strands of her hair, the flush on her high cheekbones, the furious, vulnerable pulse at her throat. That's better, he breathed, his voice thick. He reached up, his hand still tangled in the wig, and a single long finger, the one with the calloused pad, extended. He slowly, deliberately, traced the line of her collarbone, which was stark white and vulnerable above the binding of the kimono. Akira trembled. She did not want this. She did not. But her body, betrayed by months of stress and adrenaline, was responding. A slow, insidious heat was pooling in her belly, a treacherous counterpoint to the rage in her mind. You bastard!" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I am the Oyabun," he corrected her, his finger still tracing a path of fire along her skin. "And you are the woman who thought she could fight me with spreadsheets." He dropped the wig onto the floor. It landed with a soft, pathetic thud. "Now," he said, his tone shifting back to business, all heat gone, replaced by the Arctic chill of command. "You will want to get out of that shroud. The two women who dressed you will return to help." He stepped back, and the unbearable tension snapped, leaving Akira swaying on her feet. "They will draw you a bath, and then you will dress." "Dress in what?" she said, finding her voice. "You have my armor, my suits, my stilettos." "I do," he agreed. He gestured to another sliding door. "Your closet is in there. Your armor has been delivered. All of it." He walked to the main doors. "Wait." The word was out before she could stop it. He paused, his back to her. Where will you be?" she asked, hating the tremor of fear in her voice. He turned his head, looking at her over his shoulder. His gaze was dark, possessive and unreadable. "I," he said, "will be in my rooms, which are down the hall. A wife is not a prisoner, Akira. She is a queen, and a queen is given her own domain." He let the words hang. He had given her exactly what she'd demanded. Her own room, her company, her weapons. He was not a brute. He was a strategist. And he had just disarmed her with his generosity. "But," he added, his voice dropping, a velvet promise of the night to come, "a queen is expected to dine with her king." The cypress doors hissed open. "We will have dinner. Tonight. At 8. You will wear something of your own. Something strong. I want to see the woman I married, not the sacrifice I bought." The doors hissed shut, leaving Akira Kurosawa alone in the center of a vast, silent room, still trapped in the heavy, suffocating silks of a bride, with her entire stolen world at her fingertips. The game was on. Chapter 4. The two silent maids reappeared at the hiss of the cypress doors. They found Akira standing exactly where Kaito had left her, a queen in a silk and paint prison, her real hair a wild, dark storm around her shoulders. They bowed low, their faces blank. "The bath is ready, Oku-san." Akira looked at these women, their movements as precise and controlled as the sterile garden outside. They were part of his world, his property, just like her. "I don't need your help," Akira said, her voice a low, raw command. The women froze. This was clearly not in their programming. "Get out!" They looked at each other, a flicker of panic in their old eyes, and then bowed again, deeper this time. They retreated, ghosts in the machine, and the doors hissed shut, sealing her in. Akira stood in the silence for a full minute, her body vibrating. Then with a snarl of fury, her hands went to the obi, the thick brocaded sash. It was a mass of knots and folds, a puzzle she couldn't solve. She tore at it, her polished nails snagging on the priceless silk. She ripped and pulled, not with grace, but with brute force, until the heavy outer kimono slid from her shoulders, puddling at her feet like a discarded chrysalis. She was still bound in layers, silks, cottons, ties. She ripped them all off, one by one, until she stood in the center of the vast, minimalist room, gloriously, furiously naked. Her skin, chilled by the air conditioning, was pale and goosebumped. She was finally, blessedly free of the costume. The bathroom was a temple of black marble and steam. A massive, square hinoki tub, sunk into the floor, was steaming, the sharp, clean scent of cypress filling the air. She ignored it. She stalked past it to the glass-walled shower, a monstrosity of chrome and technology, and turned the water on, as hot as she could stand. She scrubbed. She scrubbed until her skin was raw, her scalp aching. She wasn't just washing off the thick white Oshiroy makeup and the rice paste from her hair. She was trying to scrub off his touch, the feel of his hand on her throat, the phantom burn of his thumb on her hip, the memory of his hot breath on her ear. It was useless. The more she scrubbed, the more she felt him, branded onto her skin, a proprietary mark she couldn't erase. She emerged, wrapped in a laughably thick towel, and walked into the closet. Her breath caught. Kaito hadn't delivered her luggage. He had replicated her penthouse closet. It was all here. Not just her clothes, but the custom, built-in, backlit shelving, the shoe wall, the racks of her armor. Dozens of bespoke suits from Savile Row. Silk blouses, her collection of killer stilettos. It was an arsenal. His words echoed in her head. I want to see the woman I married, not the sacrifice I bought. He wanted a queen. He wanted a fight. Fine, she whispered to her reflection in the full-length mirror. She didn't choose a suit. That was for the boardroom. This was a battlefield. She didn't choose a soft, conciliatory dress. That was for a victim. She chose a weapon, a dress of deep sapphire blue silk. It was deceptively simple. High-necked, long-sleeved, and cut on the bias, it clung to every line of her body like a second liquid skin. It was more restrictive than a kimono, yet it screamed power. She paired it with needle-thin, 4-inch black heels. Her hair, still damp, she blow-dried with savage efficiency, pulling it back into a high, severe, and utterly flawless chignon. Her makeup was her war paint. A sharp, black, liquid liner cat-eye and a bold, blood-red lip. When she was done, Akira Kurosawa was gone. The sacrificial bride was gone. In her place was Kaito Yamamoto's wife. At 8 o'clock precisely, she left her domain. She didn't need an escort. She had the layout of the house memorized from her single walkthrough. She was a CEO. She analyzed environments. She found the dining room. It was not the grand hall she'd half expected, filled with his tattooed lieutenants. It was an intimate, terrifying room. A simple, dark wood table was set for two. The only light came from a constellation of tiny, modern fixtures above, and the entire far wall was again that armored glass, looking out onto the black sand garden, now lit by a cold blue moon. He was already there, and he had changed his armor too. Kaito was not the feudal warlord from the shrine, nor the ink-grinding recluse from the tea-house. He was dressed in a simple, perfectly fitted black cashmere turtleneck and dark trousers. No crests, no robes. It was disarmingly simple, dangerously modern. He looked less like an Oyabun and more like a billionaire tech titan, a predator in civilian clothes. He stood as she entered, his eyes dark and unreadable, drinking her in. It was not a glance. It was a slow, deliberate, possessive inventory. His gaze started at her severe, perfect hair. It lingered on her red mouth. It slid down the long, unbroken, sapphire blue line of her body, from her throat, over the curve of her breasts, the flare of her hips, all the way down to her lethal heels. When his eyes finally met hers, they were burning. The air in the room, already cool, dropped another 10 degrees, yet a spot between Akira's shoulder blades began to burn. "Akira!" he said. His voice was a low, velvet purr of approval. This was what he'd wanted. Kaito, she replied, her tone pure ice. She moved to the table, but before she could sit, he was there, holding her chair. A perfect, gentlemanly gesture that was so at odds with the man who had bought her, it was a physical shock. She sat, her spine rigid, careful not to let her skin brush his. The meal began. Silent, black-clad servants materialized, serving a flawless multi-course kaiseki meal. Each dish was a work of art. A single perfect piece of otoro sashimi. A clear, fragrant broth. A bamboo shoot grilled to perfection. The food was exquisite, but Akira tasted none of it. It was ash in her mouth. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sound the faint click of chopsticks on priceless ceramic. The tension was a living thing. A third guest at the table, coiling between them, so thick she could barely breathe. Finally, Kaito spoke. "The K-blade," he said, gesturing to the prototype laptop she had pointedly brought with her and placed on the table. "You've inspected your kingdom?" "My company," she corrected, her voice sharp. "Yes, the servers are clean, the transfer is complete. My father is safe." "He is," Kaito agreed, sipping his sake from a small earthenware cup. "He is also retired. Effective immediately." Akira's chopsticks paused. "You forced him out." "I convinced him that his health and safety were best served by a long, quiet retirement. Far from Tokyo. You are the CEO, Akira, in title and in fact. There is no one to countermand your authority." "Except you," she shot back. His lips curved, that slow, dangerous smile. "I am not your countermand. I am your silent partner, your investor. A king provides for his queen, does he not?" "I am not your queen," she said, her voice a low, furious tremor. "I am a contractor. Here on a 1-year term, and I am not a fool. This gift. What is the catch?" "The catch," Kaito mused, setting down his cup, "is that you are here. With me. The catch is that you are brilliant and you are mine, and I find myself bored with the men I usually employ." "What are you talking about?" "You are a genius at logistics, Akira. Supply chain management. It's how Kurosawa Innovations destroyed its rivals. You didn't build a better product. You built a faster, cheaper, more ruthless delivery system." Akira's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" He leaned forward, the casual, modern man gone, replaced by the predator. The candlelight from the table cast shadows upwards, making his face a mask of sharp, dangerous planes. "I have a logistics problem, Okusan." He slid a slim, black tablet across the dark wood table. It stopped just short of her plate. "A very valuable shipment is arriving at the port of Yokohama in 2 days. It needs to be moved to a private client in Osaka by the end of the week. The usual routes are compromised. The Tokyo police have a new, very zealous task force. They are not open to traditional negotiations." Akira stared at the tablet as if it were a snake. You are asking me to help you smuggle what? Drugs? Weapons?" "I am asking my wife," he said, his voice dropping, becoming intimate, seductive, "for her strategic assessment. I am asking the most brilliant logistician in Japan to look at a puzzle that my associates have been unable to solve." "Go to hell," she whispered. "I am already there, Akira," he said, his eyes glittering, "and I am the king. Look at it, just look at it. As a problem solver, as a CEO, you don't even have to tell me the answer, just indulge my curiosity." She fought it. She truly did. She sat there rigid, her hands fisted in her lap. But her mind, her brilliant, restless, strategic mind, was already racing. Slowly, her hand trembling with a rage she couldn't quite name, she reached for the tablet. She powered it on. It wasn't just a map. It was a full data set. Shipping schedules, port manifests, police patrol routes, down to the minute, trucking company shells, holding warehouses. Her eyes scanned the data, and a small, involuntary sound of disgust escaped her. "This," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "is pathetic." Kaito's face, which had been a mask of cool amusement, sharpened. A flicker of something, fascination, lit his eyes. "Go on." "This is amateur hour," she spat, her fingers flying across the screen, pulling up files. "You're routing all your legitimate cover shipments through 3 shell corporations, but the digital footprints are a mess. They all use the same server in Panama. The registration timestamps are sequential. Any first-year forensics accountant could tie them together in an hour." She was in her element now. This was a hostile takeover. This was a flawed business plan. "And your route," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "You're trying to move the container on the Tomei Expressway? During the day? Disguised as medical supplies? You're inviting a random inspection. You're relying on bribes, not strategy. Bribes are lazy. They are a vulnerability." She looked up at him, her eyes flashing sapphire and ice. "You're not a strategist, Kaito. You're just a bully with a checkbook." The servants had vanished. The room was utterly silent. Kaito stared at her. His face was unreadable, but his chest was rising and falling in a slow, deep rhythm. He wasn't angry. He was captivated. "What?" he said, his voice a low, thick growl. "Would you do, Akira?" She had him. He was hooked. This was her world now. She pushed the tablet back across the table. "I am not your consultant, Kaito." "No," he agreed. "You're not." In one fluid motion, he was out of his chair and standing behind her. Akira's entire body went rigid. She was trapped between the table and his hard, immovable presence. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the faint, clean scent of his cashmere and his skin. He leaned down. His hot breath stirred the fine hairs at her nape. Her blood turned to fire. "You are," he whispered, his lips so close to her ear, she could feel the vibration of his words. "Absolutely magnificent." His hand came to rest on her shoulder. It wasn't a threat. It was a claim. His thumb, rough with the callus she remembered, brushed the bare, vulnerable skin just above the silk line of her dress. She shivered. A violent, full-body tremor she couldn't suppress. "Your mind, Okusan," he breathed. "It is the most dangerous weapon I have ever seen, and I find I am intensely aroused by it." He was right. This wasn't just about power. This was about her. Her brain, her intellect, the one thing she'd always had, the one thing that had always isolated her, made her a freak, a dragon lady in her own world. And this man, this monster, he found it a turn-on. He left his hand on her shoulder, a branding iron, for a beat longer. "Think about it," he said, his voice back to its normal, commanding tone. He straightened up, and the oppressive, intimate heat was gone. Akira was left breathing hard, her skin tingling, her heart hammering a furious, syncopated rhythm against her ribs. Kaito walked to the door. "We will discuss your solution in the morning. With my men, I want them to see the new queen of their kingdom." He paused, his hand on the door. "And Akira." She looked up, her eyes still wide, her red lips slightly parted. "Welcome home?" The door slid shut, leaving her alone in the cold, beautiful room, the tablet glowing like a time bomb on the table. She stared at it. "Damn him!" She picked it up and began to design a new supply chain. Chapter 5. Akira hadn't slept. After Kaito left, she had dissected his logistics problem with the same surgical, obsessive focus she reserved for a hostile takeover. The tablet, her K-Blade laptop, and a fresh pot of black coffee were her only companions. She worked through the night in her silent, armored penthouse, a queen in a sapphire silk prison, the cold moonlight on the sterile black sand her only illumination. She tore his operation apart, not with emotion, but with cold, brutal mathematics. She identified bottlenecks, vulnerabilities, and inefficiencies. Then, she rebuilt it. Her plan was a masterpiece of corporate ruthlessness. It was clean, digital, and utterly impersonal. It relied on data, not muscle, on algorithms, not bribes. It was a strategy born in the boardrooms of her world, now aimed like a weapon in his. By 5 a.m., she had 2 complete plans. One, on the K-Blade, was a new, aggressive 3-year strategy for Kurosawa Innovations, full of R&D overhauls and new market penetrations. The other, on Kaito's black tablet, was a foolproof, untraceable, and highly illegal supply chain route from Yokohama to Osaka. She looked at both, a cold, sick feeling coiling in her gut. They were both just work. Problems to be solved. And that, she realized, was the most terrifying part. She was good at this. At 7 a.m., she showered, the water scalding. This time, she didn't scrub to remove his touch. She scrubbed to sharpen her mind. For this meeting, she chose armor. Not the seductive silk of the night before, but a suit of pure, unadulterated power. It was a bespoke charcoal gray pinstripe, tailored to perfection, worn with a crisp, high-collared white shirt. No cleavage, no softness. She pulled her hair back into a chignon so tight it pulled at her temples, a warrior's knot. Her makeup was minimal, her lips a neutral gloss. Only her heels, black, 5-inch and silent as a knife, hinted at the woman beneath. When she was ready, she picked up her K-Blade and Kaito's tablet. She was a CEO walking into a board meeting. A servant was waiting outside her door. "Okusin, Yamamoto-sama is waiting for you in the Jodo." The Jodo, the high-level meeting room, the war room. The servant led her not to a Western-style conference room, but deep into the heart of the compound, to a traditional, sprawling tatami hall. It was ancient, the mats smelling of aged grass and cypress, and it was full of men. At least a dozen of Kaito's kambun, his top lieutenants, were kneeling in formal seiza on the tatami floor. They were the same hard-faced, scarred men from the wedding, all in dark, formal kimonos. The room was thick with the scent of man, silk, and old wood, and heavy with a silence that was anything but peaceful. It was the coiled, watchful silence of a predator's den. At the head of the room, on a slightly raised platform, Kaito sat. He was in a formal kuromonsuki again, the picture of a traditional Oyabun. He held a closed fan in one hand, his face as impassive as a stone god. He was no longer the modern, cashmere-clad man from dinner. He was their leader, and he was watching her. As one, every man in the room turned to look at her. Akira, in her gray pinstripe suit and 5-inch heels, standing in the doorway of a sacred tatami hall, was an abomination. She was a gaijin in spirit, a corporate woman, a walking, breathing insult to their centuries of tradition. She could feel the waves of their contempt, their disbelief, their outrage. One man in particular, younger than the others, with a sharp, arrogant face and restless, intelligent eyes, stared at her with open, undisguised loathing. He was handsome, in a brutal street fighter way, and his kimono, though dark, was of a flashier silk. This, she clocked instantly, was the ambitious one, the threat. Akira's spine, which was already steel, turned to diamond. "You may not wear shoes on the tatami, Okusan," the young one, Kenji, snapped, his voice a sharp, disrespectful crack in the silence. "This is a sacred space, not a boardroom." Akira didn't even look at him. Her gaze remained locked on the one man who mattered. Kaito's eyes, dark and bottomless, met hers. The air between them crackled. He was testing her. He was letting the sharks circle. "She is not on the tatami, Kenji." Kaito's voice rumbled, not loud, but it cut through the room like a sword, silencing the younger man instantly. "She is on the getabaki, the stone walkway. Show respect." Slowly, Kaito rose. The room, which was already his, became his kingdom. He walked, his movements fluid, from the raised platform, across the tatami, to where she stood at the entrance. He stopped in front of her, a feudal lord addressing his foreign queen. He was so close she could smell the sandalwood on his skin, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of her own suit. He said nothing. He simply held out his hand. It was not a gesture of help. It was a demand. Akira stared at his hand, long, powerful, the calloused thumb. The hand that had gripped her, branded her. She understood. He wasn't just asking for the tablet. He was asking for her allegiance in front of his men. With a cool, steady hand, she placed the black tablet in his palm. She did not place her K-blade. That was hers. Kaito's lips twitched. He had seen the small act of defiance. He turned, not offering her a hand, not inviting her in, and walked back to his seat. "This morning," Kaito announced to the room, "we will be discussing the Yokohama-Osaka shipment. Our traditional methods have been compromised by the new police task force." A low murmur of discontent. "The plan you were given," he continued, "is a failure. It is lazy, it is a vulnerability." He was using her exact words from last night. The men bristled. Kenji looked murderous. "Oyabun, that plan was built on 20 years of—" "It is a failure," Kaito repeated, his voice dropping to a lethal calm, "and it will be discarded." He placed the tablet on the low table in front of him. He tapped a button. The shoji screen behind him, which Akira had assumed was rice paper, was not. It was a massive, high-definition display. The screen lit up, not with Kaito's flawed maps, but with her plan. A complex, multi-layered interactive flowchart of data points and logistical pathways. The Kambun stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion. This was not their world. "We have," Kaito said, his dark gaze sweeping the room, "a new consultant, a strategist, one whose mind does not live in the past, one who understands the digital footprints that you all in your arrogance have ignored." He looked back at Akira, still standing in the doorway. He nodded. "Oku-san, your presentation." He wasn't asking, he was commanding. Every eye in the room swiveled back to her. She was the target, the focal point of all their hatred. Akira felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. She recognized this feeling. It was the adrenaline spike she got right before a hostile takeover. It was the thrill of the kill. She walked. Her heels clicked, a sharp, staccato, disrespectful sound on the getabaki. She did not enter the tatami room. She stood at the edge, a general on a hill, looking down at the battlefield. She placed her K-blade on a low cabinet, a clear line in the sand. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice crisp, clear, and utterly devoid of warmth. It carried to every corner of the silent hall. "What you are looking at on that screen," she began, her hand gesturing to the display, "is not a plan. It is a mathematical certainty. Your previous attempt was, to be blunt, pathetic." A collective, sharp intake of breath. Several men looked like they might leap to their feet. Kenji's hand was fisted on the hilt of the tanto dagger she hadn't noticed was tucked into his obi. Only Kaito looked amused, fascinated. "You," she said, her voice cutting like a scalpel, "were planning to move a single container, disguised as medical supplies, down the most heavily policed expressway in the country. You were relying on bribes, which, as your Oyabun noted, is a vulnerability. A lazy one." She began to pace, her heels clicking on the stone. "You don't fight a data-driven enemy with bribes. You fight them with better data. You don't hide. You become invisible." She tapped a key on her laptop, which was now wirelessly synced to the display. The screen changed. "You are not moving one container. You are moving 40. The room exploded. 40? Is she insane? Oyabun, this is madness. "Silence," Kaito commanded. Akira smiled. It was a cold, sharp baring of teeth. "You are moving 40 identical containers from 40 different shell corporations, all of which I created last night. They have staggered registration dates, different server locations from Amsterdam to Belize, and are all backstopped with legitimate 3-year-old business licenses for frozen fish." She pointed at Takeda, the older, scarred man from the wedding. "Takeda-san, you run the fish market, do you not?" The old man's one good eyebrow shot up. He nodded slowly. "Good. For the next 3 days, you will actually ship 40 containers of frozen tuna. You will use the Tomei Expressway. You will use the medical supply trucks. You will bribe the police. You will make a mess. You will let yourselves be randomly inspected and found to be carrying nothing but fish. You will create so much noise, so many false positives, so much data, that the police task force will be drowning in it by day 3. They will believe your entire operation is a joke." She paused, letting the audacity of it sink in. "And while they are busy," she continued, her voice dropping, "while they are laughing at your pathetic attempts, the real shipment, Container 41, will not be on a truck." She clicked another button. A new map appeared, a shipping lane. "It will be on a high-speed, Kurosawa Innovations-owned transport barge, the KS Orion. It will move down the coast under the cover of a legitimate pre-cleared customs run, transferring new lithium-ion batteries. It will arrive in Osaka in 36 hours, be unloaded by an automated crane, and be at its destination before the police in Tokyo have even finished impounding your tuna." She finished. The silence in the room was absolute. It was no longer a silence of contempt. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. The men were not looking at her. They were looking at the screen, at the flawless, intricate, beautiful, and utterly ruthless plan. Takeda, the old psychokomun, was the first to speak. He looked, not at Akira, but at his Oyabun. His gravelly voice was thick with something Akira had not heard before. Respect. "A feint," Takeda breathed. 40 Kagamusha, 40 shadow warriors, to protect the real one. It is Sun Tzu. "It is not Sun Tzu," Akira said, her voice cutting in, sharp and cold. "It is Amazon. It is basic, large-scale, disruptive logistics. You have been running a multi-billion-yen empire like a back-alley knife fight. Today you join the 21st century." Kenji, the young, ambitious captain, was pale, his hands shaking with a fury he could not unleash. He had been belittled, outclassed, by a woman. Akira locked eyes with him. She gave him another cold, sharp, victorious smile. And across the room, at the head, Kaito Yamamoto watched his new wife. His face was an impassive mask, but his fan, which had been still, was now tapping a slow, rhythmic, appreciative beat against his palm. His dark eyes were on fire, and they were fixed, not on the screen, but on her. He was not just aroused, he was in awe. And he was, she realized with a cold, terrifying J look, more dangerous than he had ever been. He had wanted a queen. He had just unleashed a goddess of war. Chapter 6. The next 48 hours were a symphony of controlled chaos, and Akira was its conductor. Her penthouse, her domain, transformed into the most high-stakes operations center in Japan. On her left, the K-Blade laptop was a beacon of corporate legitimacy. She spent her days on encrypted video calls, restructuring Kurosawa Innovation's R&D department, firing 3 underperforming executives, and redirecting her new lithium-ion battery project for a Q4 launch. She was a CEO, a shark in familiar legal waters. On her right, Kaito's black tablet was a portal to the underworld. It was synced in real time to the 41 container shipments, a steady digital IV drip of data. It was a perfect, terrifying duality. With one hand, she was building an empire. With the other, she was reinforcing one. She didn't leave her rooms, she barely slept. Meals appeared silently and were left untouched. She existed on a diet of black coffee and adrenaline, a state she recognized. It was the same feverish, obsessive energy that had made her a CEO at 28. On the first night, as her plan kicked into high gear, the Jodo had been a battlefield of egos. Kenji, the ambitious, arrogant captain, was in charge of the 40 tuna trucks, the Feint. He hated the plan. He hated being the diversion, and he hated that he was taking orders from a woman. His reports, delivered via Kaito's secure server, were clipped, resentful, and inefficient. Truck 7 stopped. Police inspection. Bribe paid as instructed. This is a waste of funds, Oyabun. My men could move the real package in half the time. Akira, reading this from her minimalist living room, had snorted in derision. Fool, she'd whispered. She rerouted Truck 12, deliberately sending it into a known checkpoint to be seized. She was creating the noise he was too stupid to understand. On the second night, the night the KS Orion barge was set to make its final, silent run into Osaka, the cypress doors to her penthouse hissed open. Akira didn't even look up. Her eyes locked on the glowing GPS dot of the barge. I'm working. Get out. I find, a low velvet voice rumbled, that I am too. Kaito walked into her domain. He was not in his formal robes. He was not in the casual modern cashmere. He was in a simple gray yukata, a light robe he was clearly wearing in his own private quarters. He was at home. And he had just walked into her room as if it were an extension of his own. He held a bottle of whiskey, a Suntory Hibiki 30-year, a bottle worth more than a car, and 2 crystal glasses. You've been awake for 36 hours, he stated. It wasn't a question. You will burn out. I don't burn out, Kaito, she said, her fingers flying across her K-blade, rerouting a Kurosawa shipment around a typhoon in the South China Sea. I incinerate. She felt, rather than saw, him smile. He didn't interrupt. He didn't demand her attention. He walked, with that fluid, predatory grace, to one of her low-slung Italian armchairs, the one that had a direct view of her, and of the glass wall overlooking the sterile garden. And he sat. He poured 2 glasses. He placed one on the marble table by her elbow. He took the other for himself. And then he simply watched. The silence in the room stretched, but it was not the empty, sterile silence of before. It was a shared, charged, operational silence. The air was thick with it, with the faint scent of old whiskey and the ozone of her electronics. An hour passed. The police, just as she'd predicted, were crowing. Trucks 12, 19, and 24 had been seized. The task force commander was holding a press conference. She had it muted on a small picture-in-picture window. The commander looked proud, smug. He's an idiot, Akira murmured, her eyes on the barge. He's celebrating a victory on a battlefield I invented. Most men are. Kaito's voice came from the shadows. He hadn't moved. He was watching her, his dark eyes intense over the rim of his glass. They see the diversion. They never see the blade. He gestured with his chin to her K-blade. You are just as ruthless with your own company. She looked up, her eyes sharp. You've been watching my screen. I didn't have to. I felt the seismic shift from here. Firing 3 executives, including your father's golf partner, all on the same day. It is beautifully brutal. It's not brutal, she snapped, turning to face him for the first time. The whiskey he'd poured sat untouched, a golden brown offering. Its efficiency. They were dead wood. They resisted the new battery project because it would obsolete their own comfortable divisions. I don't pay executives to be comfortable. No, he agreed, his gaze dropping to her mouth. You pay them to win. The air crackled. This was it. This was the conversation he'd wanted. Not the obsequious bowing of his men, but this. A sparring of equals. And you? She countered, gesturing to his tablet. Your client in Osaka. Who are they? The Shinsekai? You're using my plan to arm your rivals. Kaito's face didn't change, but his eyes. His eyes went cold, and a flicker of genuine, dangerous surprise lit them. How? He said, his voice a low, lethal purr. Did you know that? You're a traditionalist, Kaito, she said, leaning back in her chair, a queen on her throne. You hate the Shinsekai because they deal in unpleasant international markets, drugs, trafficking, things you find distasteful. But the new police task force has crippled you both. You've lost your traditional revenue streams, your bleeding money. She picked up the untouched whiskey glass. This isn't a shipment. This is a tribute, a show of faith. You're not arming your rivals. You're proposing a merger. You're using my plan, my KS Orion, my name as the dowry. She held his gaze, her own burning with a cold blue fire. You're not just a king, Kaito. You're a diplomat, and you're using me to unite the underworld. The silence that followed was so absolute, she could hear the faint whir of her laptop's fan. Kaito stared at her, not with arousal, not with fascination, but with something she had never, ever seen from any man. Absolute, unadulterated awe. He set his glass down. He rose from his chair. He walked, not to her, but to the glass wall, his back to her, staring out at the moonlit sand. When I was a boy, he said, his voice distant, my father told me that the Yamamoto Gumi was a dragon, that it was our duty to protect the city, to keep the unclean things out. The Shinsekai. They are unclean. He turned to face her. His face was a mask of cold, regal sorrow. But the city has changed. The police, the politicians, they are the new Shinsekai. They bleed us with laws, they choke us with taxes, and my dragon starves. My men, your men, Kenji. They are loyal, but they are stuck in the past. They know only the knife. He took a step toward her. You gave the dragon wings. He was in front of her now, standing over her. The heat from his body was a physical wave. Beep. A small green icon flashed on the black tablet. KSORION docked. Payload secure. Transfer initiated. It was done. In Osaka, an automated crane was silently lifting the container. In Tokyo, the police commissioner was still taking questions about frozen tuna. It was a perfect, flawless victory. You won, she whispered. No, Akira, he growled, his voice thick. He reached down, his hands large and warm, landing on the arms of her chair, caging her in. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. The scent of whiskey and sandalwood was intoxicating. We won. His gaze was a physical thing, a hot, liquid fire pouring over her. It traced her hairline, her tired, burning eyes, her parted lips. "Magnificent," he breathed. "You are absolutely magnificent." His head lowered. He wasn't asking. He wasn't demanding. He was inevitable. She could feel his breath, hot and sweet with whiskey, ghosting her lips. Her body, her treacherous, exhausted, adrenaline-soaked body, was screaming. It wasn't a no. It was a desperate, terrified, yearning yes. She leaned in, a fraction of an inch. Her eyes fluttered closed. SLAP. The sound was as sharp and shocking as a gunshot. Akira's hand, which she'd pulled back, was stinging. Kaito didn't move. He hadn't even flinched. He remained, caged over her, his head still lowered. But now, a vivid crimson handprint was blooming on his left cheek. He slowly, very slowly straightened up. He didn't look angry. He didn't look surprised. He looked impressed. He raised a hand, his long, calloused fingers brushing the stinging skin of his own cheek. "I see," he said, his voice calm, but a new, dangerous fire was banked deep in his eyes. Akira was on her feet, breathing hard, her chair skittering back, her hands fisted. The shipment is delivered. Your consultation is over. The terms of my contract are fulfilled." "The terms of your contract," he corrected, his voice a low, dark promise, "have barely begun." "Get out!" she seethed, her entire body vibrating with a terror that was 90% desire. "As you wish, Okusan." Kaito smiled. It was not the slow, amused smile of before. This was a new smile. It was sharp, predatory, and it was aimed not at her, but with her. It was the smile of a co-conspirator, a partner. He walked to the cypress doors, leaving his half-full glass of priceless whiskey. He didn't look back. "Takeda-san will be here in the morning," he said, his hand on the door. "He will be your new liaison. He, at least, is smart enough to listen. Kenji will require a more practical lesson." The doors hissed open. "And Akira?" She looked at him, her chest heaving, her hand still tingling. "The next time," he said, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Don't hesitate." The doors hissed shut, plunging the room back into silence. Akira stood, shaking, for a long time. She looked at the two screens, the K-blade, glowing with her legitimate, brilliant future, the black tablet, dark, silent, and satisfied, its illicit purpose fulfilled. She reached for the whiskey glass Kaito had poured for her. Her hand was shaking. She brought it to her lips and drank it down in one single, fiery gulp. It burned all the way down. Chapter 7. Kaito's promise, or threat, that Kenji would require a more practical lesson did not manifest as Akira had expected. There was no brutal reprisal, no body in the black sand garden. Instead, there was silence. And in that silence, Akira's power grew. True to Kaito's word, Takeda-san, the old one-eyed psycho-komun, became her shadow. He was no longer just an advisor to the Oyabun. He was now the official liaison to the Okusan. And he was, as Kaito had noted, smart enough to listen. Her penthouse became a fortress of global finance, both legal and illicit. Takeda, who had spent his life balancing books with an abacus and intimidation, was now her willing student. He came to her every morning at 6 a.m., not with a ceremonial bow, but with a stack of ledgers and a laptop. "Okusan," he would say, his gravelly voice filled with a new, grudging respect. "The shipping manifests from our fishing. Enterprises are down 4%. I believe our fuel distributor is skimming." And Akira, in her sharp pinstripe suit, would nod, her fingers a blur on her K-blade. "He is," she'd say, not looking up. cross-reference the fuel invoices with the GPS tracking data from the tuna trucks. He's padding the mileage logs. Fire him. Then send an encrypted file of his theft, his real theft from his legitimate clients, to the Shinsekai. They'll appreciate the business intelligence. We, in turn, will buy our fuel from them. We'll get a 10% discount for the tip. Takeda would simply stare at her. She wasn't just running their books. She was weaponizing their accounting. She was streamlining the Yamamoto Gumi. She restructured their protection rackets in Ginza, turning them into legitimate, high-end security consulting firms, doubling their revenue and making them taxable legal entities. She took their back-alley loan sharking and, with a few clicks, folded it into a series of offshore, high-interest, but technically legal, microloan corporations. She was laundering them. Not just their money, but their entire identity. She was turning the dragon, as Kaito had said, from a back-alley brawler into a global corporation. And Kaito was absent. He never came to her penthouse again. She saw him only at their silent, tense 8 p.m. dinners. They were no longer intimate affairs. They were held in the grand tatami hall, and Takeda was always present. They spoke only of business. The Osaka merger is proceeding, Kaito would say, his voice formal. The Shinsekai are resisting the new server integration protocols, Akira would reply, her voice just as cold. They are inefficient. I have prepared a memo. There was no whiskey, no cashmere, no mention of the slap, the almost kiss, the simmering volcanic tension that still vibrated in the air between them, so thick she could taste it. He was once again the Oyabun, the impassive feudal lord. And this new, cold distance was a different kind of torture. It was a strategic retreat, and she didn't know why. But while the dragon's head was turned, the serpents in the grass began to hiss. The compound, which had once been sterile and silent, was now filled with whispers. The servants, who had been blank-faced automatons, now looked at her with something new. Not just fear, but contempt. She was the Gaijin witch, the corporate woman who had bewitched the Oyabun with her numbers and her sharp Western suits. She had disrupted their world. She had, in their eyes, polluted it. And the source of that poison, she knew, was Kenji. He was the one who was feeding the whispers. He, who had been publicly humiliated, forced to drive a truck full of fish while a woman ran the real war, was now regathering his strength. He couldn't fight her with data. She had proven she was a god in that arena. He couldn't fight her with Kaito's favor. She had that in spades. So he would fight her with the one thing she had, and would always despise tradition. The invitation came, not on paper, but as a formal summons from Takeda. "This evening, Oku-san," he said, his one eye carefully neutral as he reviewed her quarterly projections for Kurosawa Innovations. "The Oyabun will be hosting the Kambun and their families for the Tsukimi, the moon viewing festival. Your presence as Oku-san is required." Akira's head snapped up. "A party?" Takeda. "I am in the middle of a hostile takeover of a Korean microchip manufacturer. I don't have time for moons." Takeda's face, for the first time, lost its professional calm. A flicker of something, concern, crossed his scarred features. "Oku-san, this is not a party. This is a gishiki, a ceremony. It is one of the most important nights of the year. The families, the wives, will be there. They will expect to pay their respects to their new Oku-san." He was warning her. A cold dread, heavier than any business deal, settled in her stomach. "What exactly is required of me?" You will sit at the Oyabun's side. You will receive them." "Receive them," she repeated flatly. "Fine. An hour. 2. Maximum. I'll be there. Akira." Takeda used her name, a shocking intimacy that made her freeze. "Wear the kimono." She did not wear the kimono. To wear the kimono, the shiramuku of her wedding, would be to wear the costume of a sacrifice. To wear any other kimono would be a lie, a capitulation. This was not a social event. It was a battlefield, and she would wear her own armor. She chose a dress of midnight blue silk, so dark it was almost black. It was severe, with long sleeves and a high mandarin collar that brushed her jawline. It was utterly modest, and yet it was so perfectly tailored that it screamed her power, her wealth, and her difference. Her hair was a flawless, severe chignon. Her lips, a slash of blood red. When she arrived at the main hall, the entire compound was gathered. The glass walls had been pulled back, opening the hall to the vast Kare-Sansui garden, which was lit by 100 paper lanterns. A perfect white full moon, the harvest moon, hung in the black sky, illuminating the black sand. It was beautiful. And it was a trap. The Kambun were there, kneeling. Behind them, in a separate, lower-ranking sea of dark, floral print silks, were the wives. They were a phalanx of identical, powdered, smiling faces, and their eyes, when they looked at her, were filled with a collective, venomous hatred. And at the head of the room, on his raised platform, sat Kaito. He was in his most formal robes, a black and silver silk that seemed to drink the moonlight. His face was a mask of stone. When she entered, a visible, audible shock went through the room. Her heels clicked on the stone walkway. The dark, western silk of her dress. The red of her lips. She was a walking, breathing insult. She could feel Kenji's gaze, hot and triumphant, from where he knelt. He was on the Oyabun's left, in the position of highest honor. She walked to the platform. She did not kneel. She did not bow. She sat on the silk cushion beside Kaito, a modern queen on a feudal throne. Kaito turned his head. His dark eyes, unreadable, raked over her. He took in the dress, the lips, the unbending steel of her spine. A muscle in his jaw feathered. He said nothing. The ceremony began. It was a stultifying series of bows, of poetic recitations about the moon, of men drinking sake in ritualized, tedious order. Akira felt like a zoo exhibit. She could feel the stares of the women, the true wives, burning into her back. Then Kenji moved. He slid, with a grace she had to admit was impressive, from his spot. He knelt in the center of the hall, before Kaito, and bowed, his forehead touching the tatami. "Oyabun," he said, his voice ringing with a false, pious humility. "On this most auspicious night, when the moon is full and our family is gathered, we are blessed. We are blessed by your strength, and we are curious to be blessed by the wisdom of our new Okusan." Akira's blood went cold. This was it. Kaito inclined his head, his face still impassive. "Speak, Kenji." "For centuries," Kenji said, his voice rising, "the mistress of this house, the Okusan, has been the heart of our family. She is the one who binds us, the one who understands our traditions, the one who teaches them to the next generation." He looked up, his sharp, handsome face a mask of false concern, and he looked, not at Kaito, but directly at Akira. "We are confused, Okusan," he said, the politeness of his words belying the venom in his tone. "You come to us with new ways of numbers and computers. They are very strong," he spat the word. "But this is our way." He gestured to the kneeling wives. "Today, 2 of our sisters had a dispute, a disagreement over their husband's honor, a traditional, deeply personal matter. It is a matter for the Okusan to solve, as is our way." He smiled, a sharp, white flash of a wolf's smile. "Okusan, we humbly ask you, teach us, show us your wisdom, settle this dispute, as our queen." The entire room, all 50 people, held their breath. It was a perfect, inescapable trap. She couldn't solve it. She didn't know the rules, the traditions, the intricate, backstabbing politics of the Yakuza wives. Any decision she made would offend one side, or worse, break a centuries-old protocol she didn't even know existed. She would prove in front of everyone that she was unfit. A gaijin in a silk dress. And if she refused, if she said, "I don't know," or "I don't care," she would be committing the ultimate act of disrespect. She would be spitting on the title Kaito had given her. Kenji's eyes were glittering with triumph. He had her. Akira sat, her spine rigid, the silence of the room a suffocating weight. She could feel Kaito's presence beside her, a mountain of silent, watchful expectation. He would not save her. This was her test. She looked down at Kenji kneeling before her. She looked at the two wives he had indicated, two older women who were now staring at her, their faces pale with fear and anticipation. She took a slow, deep breath. And then she did the one thing he never expected. She laughed. It was not a giggle. It was a cold, sharp, derisive sound that echoed in the horrified, sacred silence. "A dispute?" she said, her voice carrying, crisp and clear, to every corner of the hall. "You are asking me, the CEO of Kurosawa Innovations, who is currently managing a 300 billion yen hostile takeover, to settle a disagreement between two housewives about their husbands' feelings." She stood up. Her dark silk dress fell around her like a shadow. She was now towering over them all, a goddess of the moon, cold and magnificent and terrible. She looked down at Kenji, and her smile was gone. "You," she said, her voice dropping to a lethal, quiet hiss, "are a captain of the Yamamoto Gumi. Your men, as you call them, are out there driving trucks. My trucks. On my routes. Generating my revenue." She took a step, her heel clicking on the stone. "And you are in here, on your knees, wasting my time, and the Oyabun's time, with gossip." She turned her gaze, sweeping it over the Kambun. "You are all wasting your time. You are here, viewing a moon, while your empires, the ones I am building, are under attack from every government in the world." She looked back at Kenji. "You want my wisdom, Kenji-san? Here it is. Get up off your knees, stop whining about tradition, and go, do your job." The silence was no longer respectful. It was a vacuum, a void of pure, unadulterated shock. She had done it. She had not just broken protocol. She had not just disrespected tradition. She had taken their sacred, centuries-old gashiki, their families, their honor, and their traditions, and she had called them, to their faces, a waste of time. Kenji was on his feet. His face was no longer triumphant. It was a mask of pure, murderous, incoherent rage. His hand was once again on the hilt of his tanto. "You, Anna," he hissed, the word woman a vile curse. "You dare." "I dare," Akira said, her voice pure ice. "And you will stand down, or I will have Takeda-san audit your expense reports. I am quite sure I will find discrepancies, that the Oyabun will find very traditional." It was a direct, corporate, and utterly brilliant threat. She was using her power, not his. Kenji froze. The blood drained from his face. He was trapped. And now. Every eye in the room turned to the one man who had not spoken. Kaito. His wife had publicly, catastrophically, and magnificently humiliated his top captain. She had, in one breath, declared herself the true power, and his traditions obsolete. Kenji looked at his Oyabun, his face a mask of desperation. He was pleading. He was the loyal one. He was the one who respected the old ways. Akira, her chest heaving with adrenaline, also looked at him. She had just bet her entire life, her contract, her very existence, on the fact that he was the man from the war room, not the man from the shrine. Kaito sat, his face as unreadable as the moon. He had not moved. He simply watched. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his closed fan. The room held its breath. He tapped it once against his palm. "Kenji," he said. His voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was a low, calm, and utterly terrifying rumble. "You heard your queen." He tapped the fan again. "Go. Do your job." Chapter 8. The silence that followed Kaito's judgment was not a void. It was a physical, crushing weight. Kenji, his face a mask of sheet-white apoplectic rage, was frozen. His hand was still on his tanto. He was shaking, a man caught between the suicidal impulse to draw his blade on his Oyabun and the soul-destroying humiliation of obeying. Akira, her own heart hammering against her ribs, a vicious timpani of adrenaline and victory, did not move. She kept her eyes, cold and steady, fixed on her vanquished foe. "Kenji?" Kaito's voice rumbled again, still calm, still quiet. He had not raised his voice. He did not need to. "The moon is setting. Your queen has given you an order. Do you disobey?" The threat was unspoken, but it hung in the air like the scent of ozone. "Do you disobey me?" Slowly, agonizingly, Kenji's hand released the hilt of his dagger. The sound of his palm sliding off the silk-wrapped hilt was obscenely loud in the stillness. He bowed. It was not the deep, respectful bow he had given before. It was a short, sharp, jerky spasm of a bow, a movement of pure, undiluted hatred. "As you command, Okusan," he spat, the honorific now a vile poison on his tongue. Then he turned, his hakama swirling, and he strode from the hall. He did not run. He did not slink. He walked, his back rigid, a man marching to his own execution. The spell was broken. The room exhaled. As one, the Kambun and their wives, who had been frozen in a state of horrified voyeurism, scrambled to their feet. There were no more poetic recitations. There were no more polite farewells. They bowed, low and deep and terrified, to Kaito, and they fled. In less than 2 minutes, the grand hall, which had held 50 people, was empty. It was just the two of them. Kaito on his raised platform, a feudal lord of stone and shadow. Akira on the stone walkway, a modern goddess in midnight blue silk. The paper lanterns flickered. The perfect white moon seemed to lean in, a cold, silent witness. The air was no longer just tense. It was radioactive. It was so thick with unspoken, unresolved everything that Akira could barely breathe. The adrenaline was fading, and in its place a terrifying, vibrating vulnerability was rushing in. She had done it. She had faced down his entire organization. She had bet her life on him. And she had won. But she was also, she realized, shaking. The high of the corporate kill was fading, and she was just a woman in a dress who had just humiliated a very, very dangerous man in a room full of killers. She waited for Kaito to speak, to rage, to tell her she had gone too far, that she had broken his world. He remained silent. He simply watched her. His face was unreadable, his eyes dark, bottomless pits in the lantern light. Finally, the silence was too much. "Well?" she said, and she was disgusted to hear a faint tremor in her own voice. "Aren't you going to say something? You," Kaito's voice cut through her, "are magnificent." He rose. Not as the Oyabun, not as the impassive lord. He rose as a man, his movements fluid, His eyes, which had been cold, now burning with a banked fire so hot she could feel it from 10 feet away. He stepped down from the tatami platform, his feet silent, and he crossed the stone walkway. He came to her. He didn't stop at a polite distance. He walked until he was caging her, just as he had in her penthouse. But this was not a test. This was not a question. This was a conclusion. He was so close, she had to crane her neck to look up at him. She was breathing his air, the scent of sandalwood and the cold, crisp night. "Do you know what you did tonight, Akira?" he murmured, his voice a low, velvet growl that vibrated straight through her. I, she stammered. She, who had just stared down the Yakuza, was stammering. "I ended a stupid, archaic, and inefficient distraction." His lips, which were inches from hers, twitched. "No. You did not end tradition." He raised a hand. His long, calloused fingers, the fingers that had held a fan, the fingers she had slapped, came up, and he did not touch her cheek. He touched the pulse that was hammering, a frantic bird, at the base of her throat. "You became tradition," he breathed. "You became the new law." "My law?" His gaze dropped to her mouth, her blood-red, defiant lips. "All night. I watched you. In that dress, like a weapon. I watched them. The old wives. Hate you. I watched Kenji build his little trap. I wondered, would she fall? Would the CEO break?" "I don't break," she whispered, her voice husky. "No," he growled. "You don't." His thumb stroked once over the frantic pulse in her throat. She gasped. "You incinerate," he said, throwing her own words back at her. "You burned him to the ground. You burned them all to the ground, and you did it. With a threat. An audit." He laughed. It was not a laugh she had ever heard. It was not his polite, amused chuckle. It was a low, dark, viciously appreciative sound, ripped from his very soul. He was, she realized with a shock, unbelievably aroused. He came at you with a sword, with honor, and you. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. You slit his throat, with a spreadsheet. His other hand came up, burying itself in her hair, dislodging the severe, perfect chignon. Her hairpins, her armor, clattered to the stone floor. Her hair, long and black, tumbled down, a cascade of silk over her shoulders. "Kaito," she breathed, her hands coming up to his chest to push him away, but her fingers, her treacherous, weak fingers, fisted in the thick black silk of his robes. "I have been so furlough," he hissed, his lips moving from her ear, down the sensitive, exposed line of her jaw. "So patient. I have been the Oyabun. I have kept my distance." "The contract," she gasped, her head tipping back, "giving him more access, more. Our dinners were torture," he finished, his hot breath ghosting her lips. "To sit and talk of servers. When I wanted this." His head lowered. His mouth, which she had been dreaming of, which she had been terrified of, was now here. "You," he breathed against her lips, "are mine." And then he kissed her. It was not a kiss, it was a conquering. It was not gentle, it was not polite. It was a starved, brutal, devastating collision. It was all the unsaid words, all the tension from the war room, all the heat from the slap, all the fury and awe from the moon viewing, all rolled into one single, all-consuming act of possession. His mouth was demanding, his lips hard, and she met him with equal force. She was not a sacrifice. She was not a victim. She was a queen. And she kissed him back, her fingers clawing at his robes, pulling him closer, harder. He tasted of sake and power and a darkness that she, for the first time, realized she was not afraid of. She was part of. He growled, a deep, predatory sound, and his hand left her hair, sliding down her back, grabbing her, lifting her, and slamming her back against the ancient cypress pillar of the hall. The wood was hard against her spine, but his body was harder, a wall of muscle and heat, pinning her, claiming her. He broke the kiss, only to trail his mouth, hot and open, down her throat, to the pulse that was now his. Mine, he growled again, his teeth grazing her collarbone. Oyabun! The voice was a cracked, terrified whip, slashing through the night. Kaito froze. His entire body went rigid. He didn't lift his head from her neck. He just stopped. The silence, filled with his harsh breathing and her own, was absolute. Takeda, Kaito finally rumbled, his voice a lethal, low-octave promise of death for the interruption. He lifted his head. His eyes, when they met hers, were not the eyes of a CEO or a Yakuza boss. They were the eyes of a dragon, molten and black and full of fire. His lips were wet from hers. Her red lipstick was smeared, a bloody, beautiful wound across his mouth. Oyabun! Takeda's voice was closer now, desperate. It is Kenji! He is at the main gate. He is trying to incite the guards. Kaito let out a breath, a hiss of pure, unadulterated fury. He looked at Akira, at her ruined hair, her swollen red lips, her heaving chest. Then he smiled. It was the most terrifying smile she had ever seen. He did not release her. He slid his hand from her back to her hand. He linked their fingers, a chain of iron. Then, he said, his voice calm again, let us go and audit him. He did not let go of her hand. He did not let her fix her hair. He pulled her, his queen, his consort, his partner in war, through the moonlit hall, past the terrified Takeda, and out into the main courtyard. The gate was, as Takeda had said, in chaos. Kenji was there, his tanto now drawn. He was not alone. He had 3 or 4 guards, young, traditional, stupid, who were loyal to him. He has polluted us, Kenji was yelling, his voice cracked with sake and rage. He has let a gaijin on a spit on our traditions, on our families. Are you men, or are you her accountants? And then he saw them. He saw Kaito, his Oyabun, his formal robes slightly askew. And he saw Akira, her hair undone, her dress rumpled, her lips swollen and smeared. And he saw Kaito's hand, holding hers. And in that one, single, horrifying moment, Kenji understood. He hadn't just lost an argument. He hadn't just been humiliated. He had been replaced. You, Kenji whispered, his face going from red to a ghostly sallow white. You defiled. Kenji-san, Akira's voice, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, cut through the night. She stepped forward, pulling Kaito's hand with her. She was in charge now. Takeda-san, she called, not looking back. The tablet. The discrepancy file we prepared. Takeda, his face grim, rushed forward, holding out Kaito's black tablet. No, Akira said. My K-blade, the legal one. Takeda's one eye widened. He fumbled, but produced her sleek corporate laptop. Akira took it. She walked, Kaito still linked to her, a silent, dark shadow of power, until she was standing in front of the disgraced, armed captain. She opened her laptop. She did not flinch from the drawn blade. You are right, Kenji, she said, her voice echoing in the courtyard. I am not a Yakuza. I am a CEO. She turned the screen so he could see it. It was a spreadsheet. A very, very long one. "You have been a captain for 4 years," she said, her voice a cold, clinical monotone. "In that time, you have skimmed 7.4% of all revenue from the Ginza security firms. You have lost 3 tuna trucks, which, I have just confirmed, were sold, empty, to a scrap dealer in Saitama. You have been paying 3 ghost employees, your mistress, your brother, and your dead cousin, for 2 years. She scrolled. "In short, you are not a traditionalist. You are not honorable. You are a thief, and a very, very stupid one." Kenji looked at the spreadsheet. He looked at Kaito. Kaito's face was impassive. "I am efficient," Akira continued. "And you are deadwood. You are a liability, and I hate liabilities." She snapped the laptop shut. Kenji choked. He raised his tanto. He was a cornered animal. I will. "You will nothing," Kaito said, his voice finally booming with the full, unchecked power of the Oyabun. "You have stolen from my family. You have threatened my queen." Kaito stepped in front of Akira, shielding her. He was unarmed. He did not need a weapon. "You are no longer Yamamoto Gumi," he declared. "You are nothing. Takeda, send this audit to the Chinsakai and to the police. Let them fight over the scraps." This was the brutal finality. Not a sword, not a bullet. He was destroying him. With paperwork. Kenji let out a sound. A high, thin animal wail of pure despair. He had lost everything. His honor, his money, his name, his life. He looked at Kaito. He looked at Akira, the Gaijin witch who had destroyed him with a laptop, and with a final scream he turned the tanto and plunged it into his own gut. He fell, his body a crumpled mess on the courtyard stones, at the feet of his queen. Akira did not scream. She did not look away. She simply watched. Kaito looked down at the body. He looked at his men, who were frozen in terror. Then he looked at Akira, her face pale in the moonlight, but her eyes were hard, unflinching. He took her hand, the one that was not holding the laptop, and he brought it to his lips. Not her hand, her knuckles, a kiss of a vassal to his lord. "You," he said, his voice for her ears only, his lips brushing her skin, "are magnificent." He pulled her, his partner, his equal, his queen, away from the body and back into the shadows of his house. Their house. And the door hissed shut. Chapter 9. The cypress door hissed shut, sealing them in. The sound, usually so sterile, was now a deafening thud of finality. Locking out the world. Locking out the courtyard, the body, the blood, the terrified guards, and the cold, accusing moon. They were in the Genkin, the dark, liminal space of stone and shadow that led to the private, inner heart of the estate. And they were alone. Kaito had not released her. His hand was still linked with hers, a manacle of warm flesh and steel. Her laptop, her weapon, was still in her other hand, a dead, heavy weight. The silence was no longer the charged, electric field tension of the hall. This was something else. It was the thick, breathless, vacuum-sealed silence that comes after an explosion. Akira's ears were ringing. She was still breathing hard, short, sharp gasps. She had not screamed. She had not flinched. She had watched Kenji gut himself. She had watched him fall, and she had felt nothing, number. That was a lie. She had felt a cold, sharp, vicious spike of satisfaction. The same satisfaction she felt when she closed a hostile takeover. The same satisfaction she felt when she destroyed a competitor in the boardroom. The realization was a new, cold terror. more profound than any tanto. She had destroyed a man's life, his honor and his finances, and he had killed himself over it. And she was unmoved. She was like him. Akira. Kaito's voice. It was not the Oyabun's command. It was not the lover's growl. It was low, rough, a question. She had not realized she was shaking. Her whole body was vibrating. A string pulled too taut. The adrenaline, the victory, the kiss, the blood. It was all crashing. Her laptop, her K-blade, slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the stone floor. She stared at it. Her link to her world. It looked small, useless. She started, her voice a dry, rasping whisper. Kaito moved. In one fluid motion, he released her hand, only to scoop her up, lifting her, as if she weighed nothing. One arm under her knees, the other around her back, cradling her to his chest. Her midnight blue silk dress, her armor, was useless against the granite wall of his body, the heat of him. Akira let out a choked, broken sound. "Put me down, Kaito, No." He strode, not toward her penthouse, not toward the sterile, safe corporate world she had built, but deeper into the compound. He moved through shadows, past ancient ink-black screens, through corridors of dark, polished wood that smelled of cypress and history and him. He was taking her to his private quarters, the dragon's lair. A place she, the gaijin wife, had never been permitted. He kicked open a shoji screen, and they were in. The room was not what she expected. It was not the sterile, empty museum of the rest of the house. It was a true Western-style study, vast and masculine, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, groaning with a mix of ancient, silk-bound Japanese texts and modern English-language economics hardcovers. A massive European-style fireplace, currently unlit. And in the center, a dark, gleaming mahogany desk. He did not take her to the bed. A low, massive futon she could just see in an adjoining room. He placed her on the desk. He sat her on the cool, polished wood, his hands on her waist, and he stood between her legs, which were now dangling, her heels brushing the priceless rug. He had, once again, caged her. But this was not the penthouse. This was not the hall. This was his. He was still in his formal robes. She was still in her ruined, rumpled dress. Her hair was a wild, black silk curtain around her. His lips were still stained with her lipstick. "You are shaking," he stated. His voice was thick. I just watched a man die," she whispered, her voice trembling. I killed him." "No," Kaito said, his voice a low, dark caress. He raised his hands, his large, warm palms coming to rest, not on her body, but on her face. He cupped her jaw, his thumbs stroking the sharp, defiant line of her cheekbones. His gaze was a physical weight, pinning her, holding her. "You did not kill him," he murmured, his eyes searching hers, molten and black. "You revealed him. His honor was a lie. His tradition was a shield for his greed. You held up a mirror, Haim. Princess." He could not live with what he saw. That. His thumbs brushed her lower lip, which was swollen from his kiss. "That is not your sin. That is his." She stared at him, her heart hammering. He was absolving her. He was not disgusted. He was not horrified. He was proud. "You," she breathed. You're not." "I am in awe," he growled, and the fire in his eyes, the banked, molten heat, was back. "All my life, I have been the dragon. I have been the Kaito. I have been alone. My men, and they follow, with fear or with a stupid honor, like Kenji." He leaned in, his forehead coming to rest against hers. She could feel the heat of his skin, the faint, clean scent of his hair. And then, you, he hissed. You who sees spreadsheets in war. You who is ruthless, in a way I have only dreamed of. You are my equal. This was it. This was the true confession. Not, you are mine, but you are like me. Akira felt a crack go through her. The Ice Queen, the CEO, the woman who had built a fortress of steel and numbers around her heart, cracked. A single hot, impossible tear escaped her left eye, tracing a path down her cheek. Kaito's thumb, his rough, calloused, Yakuza thumb, moved and wiped it away. He kissed the path of the tear. A soft, reverent, devastating kiss. No, she whispered. Kaito, don't. Why? He breathed against her skin. The contract, he said, pulling back, just enough to look at her, is a piece of paper. This. He placed his hand, his large, warm, killer's hand, flat over her heart, which was thundering against her ribs. This is truth. He slid his hand from her heart, down her ribs, to the zipper on the side of her silk dress. Her breath hitched. Kaito, tell me to stop, Akira, he murmured, his eyes locked on hers, the fire in them now a raging inferno. Tell me you do not burn for this. Tell me you did not feel what I felt when I kissed you. She couldn't. She couldn't. Because she was burning. She was an inferno. She had been from the moment she'd slapped him. She was starved for this, for him, for the one man on earth who was not afraid of her, who was not intimidated by her, who saw her ruthlessness and called it magnificent. Her treacherous, weak, wanting hands, which had been fisted on the desk, came up. And just as she had in the hall, she fisted them in his robes. But this time she did not push. She pulled. It was all the answer he needed. A low, vicious, triumphant sound ripped from his throat, and his mouth was on hers. The first kiss had been a war. This was a surrender. This was a merger. His lips were no longer brutal, but they were consuming. He kissed her with a slow, deep, devastating thoroughness that was designed to unmake her. He kissed her, and she was kissing him back, her mouth opening, her body, her treacherous, brilliant body, arching into his, demanding more. The zip of her dress was a sharp, hissing sound in the quiet. His hands were everywhere. They were on her skin, on the bare, hot silk of her back, and his touch was not the rough, calloused touch of a killer. It was the broad, warm, knowing touch of a lover. He broke the kiss, his breath hot and ragged against her ear. Akira, of the dress, her midnight blue armor, pooled at her waist. She was in his study, sitting on his desk, in nothing but a black, ridiculously expensive, ridiculously useless lace bra. He pulled back, just to look at her. His eyes, molten and black, raked over her. The pale, perfect skin, the black lace, the hard, dark points of her nipples, visible through the fabric. God, he breathed. You are built. Kaito, she hissed, a command, and she grabbed his head, her fingers burying in his thick black hair, and pulled his mouth down. She was done. She was done being a CEO. She was done being an Okusen. She was his. She arched, and his mouth, his hot, wet, open mouth, closed over her breast, right through the lace. A scream, sharp and pure and not corporate, was ripped from her throat. It was a sound she had never made. He was devouring her. He was unmaking her. He was remaking her. He was merging with her. His robes were a cumbersome, useless barrier. She was clawing at them, at the obi, the sash, trying to get at him. He laughed, a low, thick, throaty sound, and he lifted his head. Eager! Heim! Shut up, she seethed, her voice a raw, husky thing she didn't recognize. Shut up. And she kissed him, a hard, biting, angry kiss, a kiss that said, I will not be second. And he loved it. He roared, a low, triumphant sound, and he fumbled. The Oyabun, fumbled with his own obi, tearing it off, his robes falling open, revealing the dragon. His chest was magnificent, a broad, tanned, sculpted canvas of power, and, coiling from his heart, over his left shoulder and down his arm, was the dragon, the Irizumi, the blue-black, scaled, ancient, and terrifying tattoo of his family. He was beautiful. He was a monster. He was hers. He took her, right there, on his desk. He lifted her, his hands on her bare hips, and he merged with her. There was a sharp, brief, white-hot flash of pain, the tearing of a contract, a seal, a life, and she cried out. He froze. Akira! Don't you dare stop, she hissed, her eyes blue and burning, locking with his, black and molten. His face cracked. The Oyabun, the dragon, broke, and what was left was awe. As you wish, he growled, and he began to move. And it was a board meeting. It was a war. It was a merger. It was a conquest. It was everything. It was theirs. And outside, the body of a man who had only understood tradition grew cold under the light of a useless, pale moon. Chapter 10. The 10 months that followed Kenji's death were not a period of peace. They were a period of conquest. The merger that began on Kaito's mahogany desk was not just a physical consummation. It was a corporate one. The line between Kurosawa Innovations and the Yamamoto Gumi dissolved. The line between Akira, the CEO, and Akira, the Okusen, vanished. And the line between Kaito, the Oyabun, and Kaito, the lover, was incinerated. They were, in a word, terrifying. Akira's penthouse war room was abandoned. She moved, not into the master bedroom, but into Kaito's private quarters. Her K-blade sat next to his 400-year-old katana display. Her pinstripe suits hung next to his formal hakama. His study, the place of their first, true merger, became the epicenter of a new, global empire. Mornings were not spent with coffee. They were spent on his futon, a tangle of limbs and rumpled, priceless silk sheets, their bodies slick with sweat, the air thick with the scent of sex and sandalwood. Kaito would be buried deep inside her, his black molten eyes locked on her blue ice ones, and they would discuss finance. The Chinsakai are resisting the server merger, she would gasp, her fingers digging into the intricate, scaled Irizumi that covered his back. They are fools, he would growl, his voice a low rumble, his hips a powerful, steady rhythm. They are sentimental. I'll send Takeda, she'd hiss, her back arching as he hit that perfect deep spot. He'll convince them. My queen, Kaito would roar, his control snapping, and he would pour himself into her. A different kind of merger, a different kind of ownership. They were a 2-person billion-dollar weapon. By 8 a.m., they would be in the study, dressed and lethal. Takeda, who had witnessed the aftermath of the moon viewing ceremony, was no longer just a grudging student. He was a devout disciple. He was the high priest of the church of Akira, and he had converted the rest of the Kambun. "Oku-san," he'd say, bowing, his one eye alight with a terrifying, almost religious zeal. "Your plan worked." "Which one, Takeda-san?" Akira would ask, not looking up from her terminal, her fingers a blur. "All of them," he'd breathe. She had done it. She had taken the back alley, feudal Yakuza, and in less than a year transformed it. They were no longer the Yamamoto Gumi. They were the YG Global Group. Their security firms were now a high-end international corporation that guarded billionaires and transported priceless art. Their logistics, formerly smuggling division, now legally managed 30% of Tokyo's shipping. Their high-interest loans were now a publicly traded, wildly successful fintech venture. She hadn't just laundered them, she had legitimized them. She had made Kaito Yamamoto, the dragon of Shinjuku, not just a boss, but a tycoon. He was on the cover of Forbes Asia, his face a mask of dark, handsome power, his past a rumored and romanticized link to Japan's feudal history. And Akira, his Oku-san, was the shadow CEO. The Gaijin witch. The one they really feared, the one who, with a single keystroke, had destroyed Kenji and a dozen other inefficient captains. The old, muttering wives were gone, replaced by a new, terrified respect. She was not just a queen, she was the queen. And in all that time, in all those months of war and profit and nights of soul-searing, earth-shattering passion, they never, ever spoke of the contract. It was the one, single, unaudited liability on their perfect balance sheet. It was the elephant in the Karesansue garden. It was the tanto left on the tatami, a silent, waiting threat. Akira, the CEO, knew the exact date. She, who lived by data and deadlines, had it seared into her internal calendar. October 28th. 1 year. The deal, the sacrifice, the merger, was complete. Kurosawa Innovations was saved. It was now a global behemoth, the crown jewel of YG Global. Her father, his health restored, amazing what a few billion yen and the best doctors in the world could do, was happily retired, puttering in his garden, oblivious, as she had insisted. The debt was paid 1,000 times over. The terms were met. And as the date approached, a new cold tension entered their perfect world. Kaito, who had become her shadow, her other half, the man who couldn't seem to go an hour without touching her, without his hand on her waist, her back, her hair. Kaito grew distant. It wasn't a coldness, it was a correctness. He started once again to call her Akira in the study, not Haim. He wore his own robes to bed. He would pause before he kissed her, a flicker of something agonizing in his dark eyes, and Akira, the Ice Queen, who had not known fear in 10 months, was terrified. She was terrified. She, who had a 180 IQ, who could predict the stock market and dismantle a rival's life, had no data. She had no idea what he was thinking. He was a man of honor, a man of his word. And his word, his contract, had been for 1 year. A temporary merger, not a hostile takeover. She found herself flinching. She, who had watched a man die, flinched when he moved too fast. She was afraid he would let go. She found herself hiding. She worked later. She took calls she didn't need to take. She built a wall, an old, familiar corporate wall. Because the one thing she could not, would not do, was ask, "Kaito, what are we?" "Kaito, do you love me?" "Kaito, please, don't let me go." She was Akira Kurosawa. She was the queen. She did not beg. And then it was here. October 27th, the day before. The study, which was usually a hub of energy and power, was silent. Takeda had been dismissed. The Kambun were gone. The house, the entire compound, was holding its breath. Akira was at her terminal, staring at a screen of data, seeing nothing. Kaito was across the room, at his desk, the one she had been taken on. He was reading a piece of paper. He had been staring at it, his face a mask of stone, for an hour. The silence was a screaming, physical thing. She couldn't take it. "Is there a problem?" she said, her voice sharp, too corporate, brittle. "The Singapore merger, is it?" "No." His voice, a rumble. He didn't look up. "The merger is fine." He said the word merger, and it was cold. Akira's blood, which he had made burn, turned to ice. This was it. "Kaito." She stood up. Her hands were fisted at her sides. "It's 9 p.m. If you have something to say, say it. I am inefficient when I am distracted." He looked up. His eyes. God, his eyes. They were not the eyes of the dragon or the lover. They were the eyes of the Oyabun, the man who had sold her, the man she had met in that first, cold, terrifying meeting. He was a stranger. "You are correct," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all heat, all life. "This is inefficient." He stood. He was in a simple, dark yukata. He was a man who was exhausted. He walked to the window, which overlooked the black sand garden. The moon, a thin silver sliver, was a scar in the sky. "Tomorrow," he said, his back to her, "is October 28th. He said the date. He knew. "Yes," Akira said, her voice a whisper. "The terms of our agreement will be met," he said. He was talking like a lawyer. "Yes." She could barely breathe. He was silent. He just stood, a shadow against the window. "Kaito," she said, her voice cracking, the Ice Queen breaking. "Kaito." "What?" He turned. His face was a sculpture of pure, agonizing duty. "I am a man of my word, Akira," he said, and her name on his lips was a wound. "I made a promise to your father, to you, 1 year. "Kaito, stop." "He is a fool," Kaito said, his voice a low, vicious hiss of self-loathing. "The man who let you go, the man who agreed to this." He walked, not to her, but to his desk. He picked up a single black lacquered box. A box she had seen but never seen. He walked, and he placed it on the desk. Between them, a coffin. A deal. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice now dead. "Your services are concluded. Kurosawa Innovations is yours, free and clear. The debt is paid." He was firing her. He was divorcing her. He was honoring the contract. "Akira," he said, and his voice broke. I have honored our bargain." He slid the lid off the box, and inside, on a bed of black, crushed velvet, were the papers. Not a memo, not a spreadsheet, divorce papers, and a check, a bank draft, for $1 billion. "This is your compensation," he said, his voice a rasp, for services rendered. Akira stared at the papers, at the check, at the payment. He had paid her like a whore. She looked up from the papers to his face. He was dying. His eyes were screaming. Say no, please, say no. Rip them up, burn them, but he couldn't. His honor, his word, the dragon's debt, he had to offer. He had to let her go, and she, Akira, the queen, the CEO, the Okusan, the lover, smiled. A slow, cold, vicious smile. The smile she had given Kenji. Kaito. Yamamoto, she said, her voice a purr of pure ice. You dare. Chapter 11. The thwack of the folder hitting the low-slung table was as sharp and final as a death knell. The sound echoed in the sudden, crushing silence. The warmth of the bath, the steam clinging to my skin, the lingering scent of his soap, it all evaporated, leaving me cold, exposed, and utterly naked. What? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Is that? Kaito's face was an impenetrable mask of serene traditional honor. It was the face he wore during ceremonies, the one that made him a stranger. He sat seiza, perfectly composed on the tatami floor beside the table, the black silk of his yukata pooling around him. He hadn't joined me in the bath. He had been waiting. It is what we agreed upon, he said, his voice a low, level baritone. The terms of our contract. My heart, which had been beating a heavy, languid rhythm from the heat and the kiss, seized in my chest. I stood, water sluicing from my body onto the priceless cedar floor, making no move to cover myself. I let him look. I dared him to. If he was going to do this, he would do it while seeing exactly what he was discarding. I see, I said, the words like ice chips. I stalked from the bathhouse, past him into the bedroom. He did not follow, but I felt his eyes on my back until the shoji screen slid shut. I didn't bother with a towel. I went straight to the wardrobe and pulled on a silk robe, my hands shaking not from cold, but from a rage so pure and white-hot it threatened to blind me. I cinched the belt tight, a warrior arming herself. When I slid the shoji open, he was still there, exactly as I had left him, a statue of infuriating, honorable stillness. I walked to the table and flipped open the folder. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just divorce papers. Inside was a portfolio, thick and meticulously organized. A new charter for Miyamoto Industries, severing all ties, direct and indirect, from the Yamamoto Gumi. A deed, transferring full ownership of a luxury penthouse in the Shinjuku Park Tower, the one I had once coveted. A bank-certified transfer slip for a sum of money that made my head spin, not just my family's debt, but 10 times that amount. It was a golden parachute, a severance package, a fucking bonus for services rendered. This, I said, my voice trembling with the effort of control, is an insult. It is a reward, he corrected, his voice still infuriatingly calm. A recognition of your contributions. Your strategies have increased the Gumi's legitimate profits by 40%. Your management of the ports has been... He paused, searching for the word. Revolutionary. This is what you have earned. It is Seika. True payment. Payment. The word struck me like a physical blow. All this time, the strategies, the late-night battles over logistics, the arguments, the shared victories, the kiss in the garden, the fire in his eyes when he defended me, the heat of his body in the bath. To him, It was all just a job, a performance review. And I apparently had been employee of the fucking year. You think you can pay me for this? I whispered, the rage so immense it left no room for air. You think this was a merger? An acquisition? It was a contract, he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. The calm in them was what broke me. There was no turmoil, no regret. Just the serene, implacable finality of a man honoring a deal. He was proud of this. The year is not over, I hissed. It is close enough. I will not hold you a day longer than necessary. You are free, Akira. Your company is clean. Your family is safe. The debt is paid. My promise is kept. He had kept his promise. Every word. He had given me everything I'd wanted when I first walked into his office. So why did it feel like he was gutting me with a tanto? You absolute honor-bound traditional fool, I spat. I snatched the folder, the weight of my freedom heavy in my hands. You think this is what I want? It is what you negotiated, he said, a flicker of confusion finally breaking his composure. It was the price for your freedom. I am paying it. And what about your price, Kaito? I stalked toward him. He finally rose to his feet, a towering shadow in the lantern light. We were nose to nose, the heat from his body radiating against the damp silk of my robe. My price is irrelevant, he said, his voice going rough. Bullshit. I jabbed a finger into the hard muscle of his chest, right over the dragon's heart. You've spent the last 11 months peeling back every layer of my armor. You've sat in my boardrooms, you've slept in my bed, you've seen me at my most vicious and my most vulnerable. You've taught me how to use a kaiken, and I've taught you how to run a hostile takeover. You kissed me, and you think you can end this with a severance package? It is not an ending. It is a fulfillment, he ground out, his hands clenching at his sides. He was fighting himself. I could see it. The dragon was straining against the Oyabun's ironclad honor. You're wrong, I said, my voice dropping. The rage was still there, but beneath it, something else was breaking free. A certainty, a final, terrifying clarity. This isn't fulfillment. It's a breach of contract. His black eyes narrowed. I have breached nothing. I have given you more than the terms. You think our contract was about money? I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. You, the Oyabun of the Yamamoto Gumi, think this whole thing was just a financial arrangement? It was at the start. But it's not now. I stepped closer, closing the last inch between us. I laid my hand flat on his chest, feeling the frantic, trapped bird beat of his heart. It matched mine. You're a man who deals in loyalty, Kaito. In omerta. In, blood out. You don't pay your family for their service. You keep them. You protect them. You die for them. You are not my family, he said, but the words were ashes in his mouth. His composure was gone. His breath was coming in short, sharp bursts. When you defended me from Kenji, you made me your family, I whispered, staring into his eyes. When you let me remake your entire organization, you made me your partner. And when you kissed me in that garden, you made me your wife. Not in name, not on paper. Mine. I saw the second he broke. The iron wall of his honor didn't just crack, it fucking shattered. With a roar that was more beast than man, he grabbed me, one hand tangling in my hair, the other clamping around my waist, lifting me from my feet and slamming my back against the nearest fusuma, the paper wall groaning in protest. Do not, he snarled, his face inches from mine, his eyes burning with a desperate volcanic inferno. Do not make this harder than it is, Akira. I am doing this for you. You're doing this to me, I shouted back, grabbing his face, my fingers digging into his jaw. You are punishing me for making you feel something. You think I can't handle this world? You think I'm weak? I have sat at your table, Kaito. I have bled for this family, and I am not going anywhere. You are a queen, he choked out, his forehead pressing against mine. You deserve a kingdom of light, not this world of shadows. Don't you get it, you idiot? My voice cracked. You are my kingdom. The shadows don't matter. I reached behind me, my hand fumbling for the Andon lamp on the table. My fingers found the folder. I grabbed the entire stack of papers, the deed, the charter, the 8-figure bank transfer. This, I said, is your seika. Your payment. I held the papers between us. It's an insult. And with his eyes locked on mine, I ripped the entire portfolio in half. The sound of tearing paper was the only sound in the room. Kaito's body went rigid. He looked at the ruined papers, then back at me, his eyes wide with a raw, unguarded shock. You ripped up your freedom, he breathed. I'm acquiring it, I corrected him. I let the 2 halves of the folder drop to the floor. I framed his face with my hands, forcing him to look at me. This was never about a hostile takeover, Kaito. It was about a merger, and I'm not done with the negotiations. Akira, he whispered, his defenses gone, leaving only the man. You want to honor the deal? I said, my voice low and predatory. Fine. Let's honor it. The contract was for 1 year of marriage, and you, Oyabun, have not been a very good husband. I pulled his head down and crushed my mouth to his. It wasn't a kiss. It was an acquisition. It was a hostile, all-consuming, teeth-clashing, soul-stealing takeover. I poured every ounce of my rage, my frustration, my terror, and my desperate, suffocating love into it. I bit his lip, tasting the copper tang of his blood, and he groaned, a sound of pure, unadulterated surrender. His hands left my hair and waist, only to slide under my robe, his palms splayed wide against my bare skin. He wasn't gentle. He was desperate. He wasn't the Oyabun. He was Kaito, and he was mine. He tore his mouth from mine, and in one fluid, powerful motion he swept me up into his arms. Where are we going? I panted, my arms locking around his neck. To finish the negotiations, he growled, stalking toward the bedroom. And this time, Queen, you will have no complaints about the payment. Chapter 12. 6 months later, I stood at the head of a glass and steel monolith of a boardroom table, 22 stories above the glittering sprawl of Tokyo. This was the headquarters of the new Yamamoto Global Holdings, a company I had personally restructured, gutted, and rebuilt from the ashes of my father's near ruin. The logistics division's third-quarter profits are up 42%, I said, my voice crisp and final, echoing in the sterile, silent room. The directors, a mix of my father's old, cowed cronies, and my own, sharper, younger hires, stared at me with a uniform expression of terrified awe. The new port automation in Yokohama is complete, I continued, hitting the remote. A new holographic chart shimmered to life over the table. Phase 2, the acquisition of the Otaru shipping lanes, will commence at 2200 hours tonight. This will give us a functional monopoly on all shipping north of Niigata. Questions? A hand, old and trembling slightly, went up. It was my father. He no longer sat at the head of the table, but at my right hand, in the newly created and mostly ceremonial Chairman Emeritus position. Akira, he said, clearing his throat. This acquisition in Otaru, the current owners, are they amenable? They were resistant at first, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. But after a series of aggressive negotiations, they saw the wisdom in our final offer. Aggressive negotiations, that was what Kaito's men called it when they'd convinced the local gumi in Otaru to peacefully sell their port rights to my legitimate company, rather than face a full-scale territorial war with the Yamamoto gumi. The lines had not just been blurred, they'd been erased. Excellent. my father murmured, sinking back into his chair, wisely asking no more questions. Meeting adjourned, I said. The directors filed out, none of them quite meeting my eye. I was no longer just a brilliant CEO, I was something else. Something they couldn't define, and it terrified them. The door slid shut, leaving me alone. A functional monopoly, a low voice rumbled from the shadowed corner of the room. Kaito stepped into the light, loosening the knot of his impossibly expensive Armani tie. He had been there the entire time, silent, watching from an alcove I'd had built specifically for him. A term you taught me, I said, walking toward him. I undid the top buttons of my own silk blouse, the tension of the boardroom finally seeping out of me. And the aggressive negotiations? He asked, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. His hand settled on my waist, pulling me against the hard, lethal lines of his suit. A term you taught me, I repeated, leaning my forehead against his. The Otaru port is clean. The transfer is legal. The Yakuza who owned it are now very wealthy and very loyal to their new business partners. You are a terrifying woman, Yamamoto Akira. Yamamoto Akira, I corrected him, the name still feeling new, still feeling like a victory. And you love it. His smile faded, replaced by that raw, burning intensity that was his alone. More than my own life. He kissed me, a hard, possessive claiming that tasted of corporate power and shadowed kingdoms. We'll be late, I murmured against his lips, my hands unhooking his tie. Let them wait, he growled, his mouth moving to my jaw, his hand sliding from my waist down over the curve of my hip. Kaito, I said, my breath catching. This isn't the boardroom at Miyamoto. This is the Kengyo. The Kengyo, the annual grand meeting of all Gumi captains. His hand stilled. He pulled back, his eyes serious. You are right. It is time. An hour later, we were two different people. The Armani and silk were gone, replaced by the suffocating, formal weight of tradition. Kaito wore a black montsuki, a formal kimono bearing the Yamamoto family crest. I was beside him in a deep indigo tombsode, my hair pinned up in a severe, intricate style that made my neck ache. We walked the engraved stone path to the main hall of the estate, the one where I had first been presented as his sacrificial bride. The same lanterns lit the way. The same scent of pine and water filled the air, but I was not the same. When Takeda slid open the grand fusuma, the hall fell silent. Dozens of men, the most powerful and dangerous captains in the Kanto region, were kneeling in perfect Caesar-style rows. Every single one of them, men who had plotted against me, who had mocked me, who had wanted me dead, bowed, their foreheads touching the tatami mats. It was a bow not of greeting, but of absolute fealty. We walked the central path, our steps silent. Kaito took his place on the raised dais, the kamiza. I moved to take my traditional place, far behind him, with the other women, in the shadows. Akira. Kaito's voice, quiet but absolute, stopped me. I turned. He patted the tatami mat directly beside him. A collective, sharp intake of breath hissed through the hall. No woman had ever sat on the kamiza during a kengyo. Not a wife, not a daughter. Not even the Oyabun's mother. It was the absolute seat of power, reserved for the Oyabun alone. I held his gaze. This was a statement. A proclamation more binding than any ring. I didn't smile. I didn't hesitate. I walked up to the dais, knelt in a perfect fluid motion, and sat at my husband's side. I was his equal, his partner, his queen. The meeting will begin, Kaito announced to the stunned silence. For 3 hours I was a ghost. I said nothing. I just watched, my hands folded in my lap. They reported on territories, on finances, on disputes. And with every report, I could see the flaws, the inefficiencies, the ancient, blood-soaked traditions that were holding them back. Finally, Kaito raised a hand. "We are done with the old business." He turned, his dark eyes finding Takeda's in the front row. "Takeda-san, you reported that our revenue from legitimate enterprises has grown by 42% in the last 6 months. Takeda bowed. "Hi, Oyabun! It is a miracle! Your strategies have—" "They were not my strategies," Kaito said, his voice cutting through the room. He turned to me. Every eye in the room followed. My heart was a war drum. "For generations," Kaito said, his voice resonating with power, "the Yamamoto Gumi has been led by the dragon, by strength, by loyalty, by blood. But the world is changing. Our traditions are our strength, but they can also be our cage." He looked back at his men. The Otaru port acquisition, the Miyamoto global merger, the new logistics software. This was not my work. This was the work of the person beside me. He was giving me credit. In front of them all. He was validating me, not just as his wife, but as his strategist. "Our world has 2 leaders," Kaito announced. "The dragon who protects the family. And now, the Empress, who will build its future." He was creating a new position. Not a Zaimu Koman, not an advisor, something more. "The Oyabun rules the shadows. The Kogo, the Empress, will rule the light. Her word is my word. Her command is my command. She is the mind. I am the sword. Do you understand?" A sea of black-suited shoulders bowed to the floor. "Hi, Oyabun! Kogo!" It was done. He had merged our worlds. He had legitimized my power in a way they could understand. Later that night, the estate was quiet, the moon full and bright over the koi pond. We were in the garden, the one where he had first kissed me. I was barefoot, the cool stones a balm against my feet. "The Kogo," I said, testing the word. "It's a bit dramatic, don't you think?" Kaito came up behind me, his arms sliding around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. He'd shed the formal Montsuki, and the familiar scent of him, sandalwood and steel, enveloped me. "They needed a title they could respect," he murmured, "a title for their queen. I, however, prefer a different one." "And what's that?" "Okusan," he whispered, his lips brushing my ear. "Wife." A shiver went through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "You've tied me to you, Kaito," I said, my hand covering his, which rested on my abdomen. "With titles, with power, with honor." "And with this," he said, his hand splaying protectively over my stomach, where the slightest, most impossible curve was beginning to show. The one secret we hadn't shared with the boardroom or the Gumi. The heir. The true merger of our empires. The contract was for 1 year, I mused, leaning my head back against his chest. "I think I'm overdue for a renegotiation." "This contract is for life, my queen," he said. "Good," I said, turning in his arms to face him, my hands sliding up his chest. "Because I'm not done. Miyamoto Global is strong. The Yamamoto Gumi is secure. But I've been looking at properties in London and New York. The world, Kaito, is a very large company, and I've always loved a hostile takeover." He stared at me for a long moment, the Oyabun, the dragon, the husband, and then he threw his head back and laughed, a full, free sound that echoed in the moonlight. He pulled me close, his eyes alight with the fire I loved. "Then let us acquire it all, Kogo." He kissed me, and as I melted into him, I knew the truth. I was not a sacrifice. I was not a prisoner. I was not a wife in name only. I was a woman who had walked into the dragon's den to save her company, and, in the end, had staged the most ruthless acquisition of her life. I hadn't just saved my empire. I had conquered his. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Forced to be His Queen. writing Akira and Kaito's journey, from their high-stakes negotiation to them finally choosing each other, was an incredible ride, and I'm so thrilled I got to share it with all of you. Your support, comments, and reactions make all the hard work worth it. I have to ask, what was your favorite chapter or moment? Were you Team Akira or Team Kaito from the start? What was your favorite sizzling scene? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. It means the world to me to read what you think. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story.